Chapter 1437. The sword sect of the world was well behaved after descending. To put it more accurately, the sword sect of the world was terrified. Swordsmen would rather break than bend, but they were also afraid of death. During the battle in the southern Daluotian region, the sword sect of the world was on the brink of death. If not for Zheng Tai from the Three Pure Temple, there might not have been a sword sect of the world anymore. Therefore, after they descended to the lower realm, the sword sect of the world found a very remote place in the 100,000 mountains of West Chu to set up their sect. They didn't advertise it wantonly like the other sections. Instead, they kept a low profile and recruited disciples. Therefore, when Monk Long Tu came to find him, Mu Baishuang rejected him decisively. Monk Long Tu smiled. "Sect leader Mu, don't reject me so decisively. I told you that even the Sanskrit sect will help. What are you worried about?" "It's not like the Sanskrit sect has never suffered at the hands of Chu Xiu," Mu Baishuang said expressionlessly. Monk Long Tu shook his head. "Times are different now. We have set up so much. If Chu Xiu still manages to turn the tables, then he is the chosen one. I am here with sincerity. Everyone from the sword sect of the world should have heard of the sword desolate domain, right?" Mu Baishuang's expression changed when he heard that. Of course he knew about the sword desolate domain. Could be said to be the holy land of the sword Tao since ancient times. To be more precise, it was the beginning of ancient times. At that time, there was no sword sect of the world, and there weren't even sects that specialized in the sword. Most people cultivated the sword Tao in their own sections. In reality, their initial martial Tao wasn't the sword Tao. Those people could be said to be the ancestors of the sword Tao. The sword desolate domain was the place where all the sword Tao experts in the world fought and studied the sword Tao. However, something went wrong in the small world where the sword desolate domain was collapsed. The entire sword desolate domain was destroyed and countless treasures and sword techniques were lost. In ancient times, the sword sect of the world searched, but they couldn't find it. Did this monk know about the sword desolate domain? Do you know where the sword desolate domain is? Monk Long Tu shook his head. Of course not. No one can be sure if that place still exists or if it was completely destroyed. However, I know the whereabouts of a broken sword that was passed down from the sword despair domain. That broken sword had accumulated sword chi for God knows how many thousands of years, and I'm not a sword cultivator, so I can't pick up that sword, but Sovereign Mu can. As long as you agree to help me deal with Chu Xiu, I'll bring you to get that sword. After that, this sword will belong to your sword sect." Mu Baishuang remained silent for a while before finally nodding in agreement. It was unknown whether it was his hatred for Chu Xiu or the temptation of the sword that drove him to agree. When Monk Long Tu went to the World Sword Sect to recruit people, the people from the Brahma sect also came to the Sky Demon Palace, which gave Yuan Kongqing a shock. The Heavenly Demon Palace had nothing to do with the Sanskrit sect, so why would the Sanskrit sect suddenly come to the Heavenly Demon Palace? Was it because he had cooperated with Chu Xiu that the Brahmin sect had come to settle the score? Without waiting for Yuan Kongqing to ask, Renaja said in a deep voice, "Where is the Supreme Heavenly Demon? Where did this junior come from? What business do you have with me?" A black fog swirled around and the Supreme Heavenly Demon's primordial spirit body reappeared in the main hall. Previously, Chu Xiu's cross lotus seal had destroyed a lot of his primordial spirit power, so he had been cultivating in the Sky Demon Palace during this period of time, trying to recover his strength. Of course, Yuan Kongqing wouldn't agree to use the lives of the Sky Demon Palace's martial artists to help the other recover his strength. However, everyone gave a little blood to the other party for the other party to slowly refine. Previously, Chu Xiu came to find you to ask about the primitive devil cave. Where did you point them to in the end? Tell me quickly. The Supreme Heavenly Demon had just been beaten up by Chu Xiu and was still in an extremely sullen state. At this moment, Renaja's words carried a hint of interrogative meaning, which instantly made the Supreme Heavenly Demon furious. "How dare you? Who gave you the guts to speak to me like this? Even the ancestors of your Sanskrit religion had to be docile in front of me." Yuan Kongqing's expression changed. He seemed to have forgotten to tell the Supreme Heavenly Demon that he couldn't afford to offend Chu Xiu, but he definitely couldn't afford to offend this person. "You don't know how to appreciate favors." Renaja snorted coldly and formed a seal with his hands. A blurry four-armed Dharma appeared behind him. The four arms contained heaven and earth, as if it was a separate world, trapping the Supreme Heavenly Demon within. A golden lotus bloomed in that world, exploding with dazzling Buddhist light. In an instant, the black fog and demonic chi around the Supreme Heavenly Demon were completely purified. It was said that the Brahma god was born from a golden lotus. In the Sanskrit religion, the Shiva temple represented death and destruction, while the Vishnu temple represented creation and balance. The power of the Brahma god represented life and purification. Although its attribute was the complete opposite of the power of the Shiva temple, it was still incomparably domineering. Immediately, the supreme heavenly demon let out a blood-curdling scream, and the primordial spirit that had just recovered was immediately heavily injured again. I'll tell you. Chushio has gone to the western desert. I don't know the exact location. Chushio also needs to search the western desert to determine the location of primitive devil lair. Rinaja snorted lightly. Why didn't you say so earlier? What a waste of time. After saying that, Rinaja left leisurely. At this time, the supreme heavenly demon was already on the verge of death. Supporting his extremely weak primordial spirit, he forced himself to say angrily, "When a tiger falls to the plains, he'll be bullied by dogs. These damn juniors. Sooner or later they'll pay the price." This time Yuan Kongqing didn't say anything. Instead, he ordered someone to take out a pen and paper, then wrote a bunch of names on it and handed it to the supreme heavenly demon. "What's this? These are all people Senior can't afford to offend. Next time you meet them you'd better be more polite." Western Desert Sword King City. This time, when Chu Xiu arrived at Sword King City, he discovered that Fang Chi Xiao had already taken over the position of Sword King City's sect leader. This news didn't cause much of a stir in the pugilistic world. But when he saw Chu Xiu, Fang Chi Xiao immediately started complaining. "Brother Chu, you don't know this, but being a sect leader is not something a human should do. Today there's trouble here and tomorrow there will be trouble there. No matter what you do, you have to prioritize Sword King City. Even I'm envious of your battles in the Central Plains warriors. Even if I don't participate, I can just watch from the sidelines. But in the end, all I can do is count the sand and listen to Anemophilia's stories." Behind him, Heavenly King Shin's face darkened. He snorted coldly. "Not something a human should do? So I've been the sect leader of Sword King City for so many years, and now I'm not even human?" Although Heavenly King Shin had already abdicated, and Fang Chi Xiao was stronger than Heavenly King Shin, Heavenly King Shin still shrunk his neck when he heard this. Heavenly King Shin cupped his fists at Chu Xiu. "I wonder what cult Master Chu's orders are for you in Sword King City this time?" Chu Xiu said, "I want to find a place in Western Desert. I have some clues here. The primitive devil's cave in Upper Mortal Heaven is in Western Desert. But I only know that it's in Western Desert. I don't know the exact location, so I need a lot of manpower to find it. Sword King City is the only power in Western Desert, so I can only ask for Brother Fang's help." Fang Chi Xiao waved his hand. "Don't worry, leave this matter to me. Brother Chu, tell me all the possible anomalies that the primitive devil's cave might show." After Chu Xiu finished, Fang Chi Xiao found his disciples and had them translate the anomalies into the local languages of the foreign tribes. Then he distributed the information to them one by one. The Western Desert was indeed sparsely populated. But no matter how sparsely populated it was, there were still some small countries and tribes in the western region. Sword King City could be said to be the sole ruler of the entire Western Desert. They were the best at this kind of thing. It was only at times like this that Fang Chi Xiao acted like a sect leader. Sword King City went to find out more about the primitive devil's cave, while Chu Xiu stayed in Sword King City with his people. Since they had nothing to do, they decided to stay and talk about martial arts. The disciples of Sword King City could also listen. Although Wei Shuya was the only one among them who was proficient in swordsmanship, a martial immortal's explanation of martial arts was beneficial even if they only understood a few sentences. Sword King City was very fast. Or it could be said that Sword King City's control over the entire Western Desert was astonishing. When the news spread, all the small countries and tribes in the western region put aside their conflicts to look for clues for Sword King City. In just over 3 months there was news. Just as Chu Xiu and the others were about to set off, Fang Chi Xiao looked at Heavenly King Shin cautiously. "Can I go with Brother Chu and the others?" Heavenly King Shin said unhappily, "You're the sect leader now. If you want to go, who can stop you?" Fang Chi Xiao's eyes lit up when he heard that. He quickly pulled Chu Xiu and the others away as if he was afraid that Heavenly King Shin would go back on his word. It was a small tribe that had found clues about the primordial demon cave. The tribe leader personally led Chu Xiu and the others to a desolate land at the border of the Western Desert. The tribe leader pointed in one direction and said in stiff Central Plains Chinese, "Wielder of the Sword of the Extreme West, distinguished guests, this place is very similar to the place you've described. According to our tribe's records, this is a place occupied by the Grim Reaper. Even the strongest Hu Yang would not be able to survive here. The strongest warrior in the tribe would immediately become weak and sickly after staying here for a day. Every July there would be a black sandstorm here, but it would not spread. It would only stop in this area. Fang Qishao asked, "Do you feel anything?" Chu Xiu shook his head. "I don't know. I need to try. This primordial demon cave is dead. It doesn't belong to the mortal world. It should be in a sealed state now, so there won't be any leakage of power." As soon as he finished speaking, the third eye on Chu Xiu's forehead opened. Pure extreme Yin demonic chi burst out, tearing the ground in front of him. In an instant something seemed to be triggered. The entire ground started to churn. Demonic chi shot up into the sky, crossing the sky. In an instant the entire sky turned pitch black. A door that looked like a spatial rift appeared in the middle of the surging demonic chi. Chapter 1438. The commotion caused by Chu Xiu's move was a little big. Even Fang Qishao was dumbfounded. These 3 eyes are more useful than 2 eyes. I say, Brother Chu, cultivating to your level, besides having 3 eyes, wouldn't you have a few more arms, a few more legs, or even a few more of that thing? Stop talking nonsense, hurry up and go in. This door is only temporary, it won't last for long. Fang Qishao's thoughts were always so strange. Chu Xiu didn't have time to accompany him to talk nonsense. The group entered the primitive devil cave through the door, and instantly felt the cold and gloomy demonic chi. Of course, only Fang Qishao wasn't used to it. Chu Xiu and the others all cultivated demonic techniques, so they didn't feel anything wrong at this moment. Previously, Chu Xiu had been to the primitive devil cave in the lower mortal heaven. Compared to the lower mortal heaven, the primitive devil cave in the higher mortal heaven only gave Chu Xiu a feeling of deathly stillness. Although the place where the primitive devil cave was located should be deathly stillness, the demonic chi was originally formed from the power of extreme Yin. But facing death to live, even in an extremely deathly stillness, there would still be some dangerous ghosts and other things born. For example, the human skull tree that Chu Xiu encountered in the lower mortal heaven, as well as the heart demon, etc. They could be considered as existences nurtured by the primitive devil cave. However, there was nothing here. There were only craggy rocks, dull silence, and endless darkness. There was not even a hint of danger. Fang Qishao curled his lips. I thought that this place would be the same as the primitive devil cave in the lower realm. Who would have thought that this place would be like this? It wasn't easy to get something peacefully, don't jinx it. Previously, unparalleled heavenly demon had already said that there could only be one primordial devil cave in a world. Since high mortal heaven was destroyed, this primordial devil cave would naturally fall into a deep slumber. Therefore it wasn't strange for it to look like this. According to Supreme Heavenly Demon, everything else had dissipated. Therefore the only danger in this primitive devil cave was the demonic Dao martial artists who had fallen here in ancient times or even earlier. After they perished here, their souls, under the influence of the primitive demon cave and the dual effects of the demonic path source, had turned into demon puppets to guard this place. Therefore Chu Xiu directly led the group all the way through the air, advancing in a certain direction. There was no spatial direction in the primitive demon cave. In any case, as long as one went in one direction, they would eventually reach the end. With everyone's speed, it took them more than half a day to finally see the place at the end. It looked like a natural stone pagoda. The gigantic black pagoda shone with a glazed luster and was over 1,000 feet tall. At the very top of the pagoda, there was a faint demonic aura lingering around it. But at this moment Chu Xiu could feel that it was the demonic path source. Because the moment he saw this thing, the yin and yang source in Chu Xiu's body trembled slightly. However, at this moment, a powerful tremor suddenly came from the front of the stone tower. The ground was torn apart, and demonic aura soared into the sky. Figures wrapped in demonic aura crawled out of the ground. From the style of these people's clothes, one could tell how many eras they were from. How long has it been? I don't know. Maybe a year, maybe 10,000 years. Someone wants to take away the source again? Maybe taking it away will be a release for us. These voices were extremely noisy. It seemed like they were made by a single person, but it also seemed like everyone was making them at the same time. These demon puppets should have lost their consciousness and yuan spirits. Now they only had some remnant obsessions left. When Chu Xiu took a step forward, all the demonic puppets immediately turned their gazes towards Chu Xiu. A towering demonic aura pressed down on Chu Xiu. If you want the source, you have to answer a question. If you can't even get past us, what right do you have to touch the source? Oh? What question? Countless obsessions sounded in an instant. Even the yuan spirits of Mei Qinglian and the others were in pain. What, it's a demon? Chu Xiu, who bore the brunt of the attack, instantly felt the demonic voices piercing his ears. It was as if there were countless voices beside his ears, asking the same question in his heart. What is a demon? The corner of Chu Xiu's mouth twitched into a smile. Soul interrogation. Some people cultivated Tao for their entire lives, but they didn't know what Tao was. Some people practiced Zen for their entire lives, but they only thought that they worshipped Buddha. Then what is a demon? A name, a power, or a spirit? Then why did they call it a demon and not something else? Perhaps every demon path martial artist standing here had answered this question. The demon puppets present had also answered this question in the past, but they answered incorrectly, so they became demon puppets now. The supreme heavenly demon should have also answered incorrectly. But at that time he was already a powerhouse of the ninth heavens, so he chose to forcefully defeat these demon puppets. But he couldn't take away the demon source. But now, for Chu Xiu, the sect master of the demon path, what is a demon? Raising his head, Chu Xiu looked ahead and said lightly, I stand here and I am a demon. As his voice fell, the demon source within Chu Xiu's body throbbed. In an instant, the soaring demon flames filled the entire primitive demon cave, causing a different kind of power to appear in this deathly silent primitive demon cave. Chu Xiu also didn't know what a demon was. He only knew that when you stood at the peak, if you said you were a demon, then you were a demon. If you said you wanted to become a god, then you were the only god in this world. If you put on a kasaya and sat on a lotus throne, then you would become a Buddha. Tao, Buddha, and demon didn't matter what they were, but what you wanted to become. Chu Xiu didn't know whether this answer was correct or not. In any case, he believed that he was right. The power of the demon source spread throughout the primitive demon cave, and at the same time, it also stimulated the demon source above the tower. Below, the demon puppets exuding powerful demon chi were also stimulated. All the demon puppets knelt on the ground, as if they were paying homage to their demon lord. At the same time, their power began to flow into Chu Xiu's body on their own initiative. At this moment, Chu Xiu was completely shrouded in demon chi, and demon flames filled the skies. Fang Qishao stared at all of this, dumbfounded. He murmured, Is this the legendary child of destiny? Once the tyrannical aura of a king comes out, all four sides kowtow? Say, if I go to the other sword sects and say that I am a sword, will they recognize me as their master and make me the #1 sword master under the heavens? Mei Qingmian glanced at him and said lightly, They will think that you are very cheap. They will think that your existence is simply a humiliation to the sword cultivator lineage. Then they will beat you up and nail you to the ground in front of their sect. I don't seem to attract so much hatred, right? Fang Qishao shrank his neck. Wei Shia shook his head and said, These demon puppets are not choosing a master now. Instead, they are choosing an existence that can perfectly match their demon source. Most of the demon Dao martial artists actually don't know what a true demon is. Cultivating demon Dao cultivation methods is a demon? Opposing the righteous path is a demon? Or is it like that supreme heavenly demon who conducted all kinds of forbidden experiments to create an indestructible primordial spirit, but everyone still calls him a demon? Such a superficial understanding won't gain the approval of these demon puppets. It's even more impossible to subdue them with pure arrogance. Fang Qishao was surprised and said, Elder Wei, since you have such a thorough understanding of the demon Dao, will it have the same effect if you go up there? Wei Shia smiled bitterly and said, Of course not. Understanding is one part of it and strength is another. Only someone with Chu Xiu's cultivation and powerful physical strength can withstand the power of these demon puppets entering one's body. If it were me, I reckon my body would be completely torn apart after a few blows. If you want to obtain the power of the 10,000 demon kowtow, you must first have the strength to withstand it. Fang Qishao nodded in understanding. However, he was wondering if there was such a place in his sword lineage. At this moment, Fang Qishao's expression suddenly changed. He shouted, Watch out! Say Brother Chu. Among everyone present, only Fang Qishao wasn't a martial immortal. However, after going through many experiences in the Dalyu Ocean, he had reached the half-step martial immortal realm. He cultivated the Karma Sword Dao, so his perception was extremely sharp. It couldn't even be considered perception. It was a feeling of a sudden impulse. As soon as Fang Qishao's voice fell, everyone moved. Although 7th young Master Fang was usually a little unreliable, no one dared to ignore his serious and anxious tone at this moment. Lu Jiang, he was the fastest. He didn't move. Instead, he formed hand seals on the spot. Suddenly, a blood-red shadow floated out. It drained half of his blood chi and appeared behind Chu Xiu. At the same time, in the pitch-black primitive devil cave, the original god's figure strangely appeared. As if he had been lying in ambush, his forearms formed fist seals and smashed towards Chu Xiu. Under the fist seals, Lu Jianghe's blood-red shadow exploded and turned into a bloody mist. However, he had successfully blocked the attack. At this moment, Mei Qinglian's red lotus karmic fire, Wei Shuya's great heavenly demon palm, and Lu Fengxian's peerless halberd all came crashing down. Among them, Wei Shuya was the first to become a martial immortal. With the help of the dragon vein's power, he had passed the stage of stabilizing his cultivation and entered the fourth heaven. LV Fengxian's talent was amazing and she had a deep foundation. During this period of time she had also stepped into the third firmament. Only Mei Qinglian was slightly weaker. She had just become a martial immortal not long ago and hadn't had the time to stabilize her cultivation. She was only at the first sky. However, the strange effect of the red lotus karmic fire could still affect her original spirit. Seeing that his sneak attack had failed and the others' attacks were approaching, the original god's figure flashed and he immediately fled. At this time Monk Long Tu, Renaga, and Mu Baishuang appeared. Monk Long Tu said with pity, "That kid who cultivates the karma sword path is too sensitive. Otherwise, with the original god's non-elemental body, he could completely fuse with the primitive devil cave. This sneak attack could definitely injure Chu Xiu. It's a pity that it's too late." Renaga stared at the demon path origin and said, "It's not too late. As long as the demon path origin hasn't been taken by Chu Xiu, it's not too late." Chapter 1439. Chu Xiu wasn't surprised that someone was ambushing him in the primitive demon cave. With Chu Xiu's current strength and status, there would definitely be people watching him at all times. Perhaps when he sent Xikong Tan and Wind Sweeping Tower to investigate the source energy of the demonic path, there might already be people watching him. But what surprised Chu Xiu was that this group of people had actually come in groups. Looking around, Chu Xiu immediately guessed that the one who was secretly colluding with them should be Monk Long Tuesday. Chu Xiu stared at Monk Long Tu and sneered, "You can do it twice but not thrice. You managed to escape the first 2 times, but this time, you won't be so lucky. Those who have died once should cherish the chance to live even more, but you seem to be impatient to die again." Monk Long Tu said indifferently, "Chu Xiu, you can only speak ruthlessly at a time like this. This time it's not me who can't escape, it's you. This is the primitive demon cave. It's impossible for you to release that delusion. There are 2 existences comparable to the 8th heavenly layer here. How are you going to fight them? How are you going to fight them?" Mu Baishuang also silently pulled out a sword, a broken sword. The broken sword was covered in rust, and it was hard to tell whether it was rust or dried blood. When the seemingly ordinary broken sword was pulled out, a sharp sword aura encircled the entire land. The dazzling light even lit up the pitch-black primitive demon cave. This was the broken sword that Mu Baishuang had followed Monk Long Tu to retrieve, the broken sword from the 10,000 sword desolate domain. The sword aura on it had been nurtured for tens of thousands of years, and its power had condensed to a terrifying level. Apart from Mu Baishuang, who had cultivated the absolute sword principle to the 7th heavenly layer, ordinary people simply couldn't control a weapon of this level. Chu Xiu revealed a cold smile, "But you also seem to have forgotten something. I am the leader of the demon sect and this is the primitive demon cave. This place is supposed to be my home ground. Do you really think that I, Chu Xiu, can only rely on threats as a trump card?" As soon as Chu Xiu's voice fell, the power of the demonic puppets poured into Chu Xiu's body. By now, a thick cloud of demonic energy had already enveloped Chu Xiu. Even his eyes had been dyed pitch black. Amidst the surging demonic energy, the imposing aura actually made Renaja feel a sense of oppression. Renaja asked Monk Long Tu, "Was this also within your expectations?" Monk Long Tu shook his head. "This primitive devil cave has been sealed for tens of thousands of years. Apart from the source of the demon path, who knows what else is inside? As the leader of the demon sect, it is normal for Chu Xiu to obtain some opportunities here. It isn't a big problem, so don't worry about it." Just as Monk Long Tu finished speaking, Chu Xiu let out a roar. In that instant, all the demonic shadows that surged into his body were released. They covered the sky and ground as they kowtowed in front of them. Boundless dark clouds of demonic aura tore through the void of rules, as though it had turned into a world of its own, enveloping the few of them. 10,000 demon worship. This was a sacred art, but it could also be said not to be a sacred art. It was the power of the demon path experts that had been accumulated for countless years in primitive devil cave. Now that it had surged into Chu Xiu's body, although the power hadn't been refined by Chu Xiu, the will of the demonic puppets, or rather their lingering thoughts, had evolved into this 10,000 demon worship. Since ancient times, apart from the supreme demon lord, who could withstand the worship of so many demon path experts? Monk Long Tu and the original god couldn't, Mu Baishuang couldn't, and even Renaja couldn't. Is this what you meant by not a big problem? Renaga roared angrily. He formed a seal with his hands, and the Brahma Dharma idol appeared behind him. A golden lotus appeared on each arm, blooming brilliantly. It formed a golden lotus formation around Renaga, enveloping him within. Monk Long Tu flashed and hid behind Renaja. At the same time he chanted Buddhist chants. Golden Buddhist light covered him, turning him into unmovable Buddha. Mu Baishuang wasn't good at defense, but the sword will on the broken sword in his hand was shocking. He slashed forward, using absolute strength to resist the power of the 10,000 demon worship. Only the original god was in the most miserable state. He didn't have any defensive techniques, nor did he have any external help. Fortunately, his physical body was strong enough to resist even Chu Xiu's lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. Therefore he could only use his own body to resist this power. After a few breaths, when the powerful demonic energy in Chu Xiu's body was completely released, the few of them were in a sorry state. Renaja's face was pale. The golden lotus around him had already shattered. Although Monk Long Tu hid behind him, he was suppressed by the powerful demonic energy. Cracks appeared all over his body. Mu Baishuang and the original god, who was purely using his physical body to defend, also spat out blood. You all can take it. Since you're here today, none of you can think of leaving. Chu Xiu's eyes flashed with a cold murderous intent. The power of the 10,000 demon worship attack just now was indeed shocking. Even if Chu Xiu used the world millstone and the furnace of good fortune, he wouldn't be able to reach this level of power. However, the price of this power was that the power in the demon puppets had been mostly used up. Although the remnant willpower and intent in the demon puppets had allowed Chu Xiu to control the 10,000 demon worship, if this power hadn't been used up, Chu Xiu could have slowly cultivated and digested this power in the primitive demon cave. He could have even used this power to reach the peak of the 7th heavenly layer and then used the origin power to reach the 8th heavenly layer. But now, everything had been destroyed by these fellows. How could Chu Xiu not be furious? Just as Chu Xiu had said, the primitive demon cave was his home ground. So what if there were two existences comparable to the 8th heavenly layer? Did they really think that Chu Xiu could only rely on the sealed heavenly souls in the Dalu Ocean to scare others? As Chu Xiu spoke, demonic figures circled around Chu Xiu's body. As Chu Xiu punched out, the entire primitive demon cave was filled with the deafening roars of the heavenly demons. When he saw this, Renaga simply wanted to curse. He had believed Monk Long Tu's words and surrounded Chu Xiu to kill him. He had said that everything was within his control, but the result was completely different from what they had planned. Just now, when he was attacked by the power of the 10,000 demon worship, Renaga had used up a lot of his energy. However, at this moment he was the only one who could withstand it. 7 colored rays of light appeared around Renaga's body. They contained different rules of power that could transform all power into pure vitality. Chu Xiu's fist met the incoming attack, but his figure immediately swelled up. He used the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth, imbued with powerful demonic power. With a loud bang he sent Renaja flying. Renaga's expression suddenly changed. Only now did he realize that Chu Xiu had actually stepped into the 7th heaven realm without him knowing. There were 9 heavenly layers of martial immortals. In reality, most cultivators thought the same as Chu Xiu. Although there were 9 heavenly layers, they were divided into 3 stages. Once one reached the 7th heavenly layer, one would be considered a late martial immortal. Their power would multiply. Previously, Chu Xiu's physical strength was already extremely shocking. Now that he had reached the 7th heavenly layer, even Renaga's pure strength was inferior to Chu Xiu's. At this moment, the original god and Mu Baishuang had already attacked. Regardless of whether it was right or wrong to surround and kill Chu Xiu, they had already attacked. If they didn't finish off Chu Xiu, they would all die here. Monk Long Tu also wanted to attack. At this moment, Lu Jianghe and the others surrounded him with sinister smiles. Although they didn't even have a single 5th heavenly layer cultivator, they were still confident that they could finish off Monk Long Tu if they joined forces. The tide of the battle had turned in an instant. Their original plan was to surround and kill Chu Xiu here. Since when did they end up being surrounded and killed by Chu Xiu? Under the huge heavenly law embodiment of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu's body was like an ancient demonic god. A huge palm swung down. With a loud bang, the original god was pressed into the ground. At the same time, a shocking sword aura flashed and slashed down. It was the simplest and purest sword aura, but it was so sharp that even Chushio's heavenly law embodiment of heaven and earth couldn't withstand it. Chushio's arm was torn off. Chushio raised his eyebrows slightly. He broke through the formation and slashed out with the power to swallow the sky. The Seven Limits was a demonic blade, and in the environment of the primitive devil cave, its power increased by 30%. What appeared in front of Mu Baishuang was no longer a black hole. Instead, it was a demon domain that completely enveloped him. At this moment, a Buddhist chant descended. Renaga formed a hand seal, and the two-faced four-armed Dharma embodiment behind him gradually became a four-faced Dharma embodiment. The four faces represented the entire world. An invisible glass light barrier completely trapped Chushio within, isolating him from all the nomological powers outside. At the same time, the four-sided reincarnation wheel rotated, emitting rays of light that shot towards Chushio. Chushio looked up. The third eye on his forehead bloomed. The power of yin and yang condensed into a pillar of light that seemed to pierce through the void, shattering all the light. Looking at the glass light barrier around him, Chushio said indifferently, "Isolating the nomological powers? This is the primitive devil cave. Even the power you attract contains a trace of demonic chi. You can isolate the nomological powers, but what will you use to isolate the demonic chi?" As Chushio's voice fell, countless demonic shadows appeared around him. But this time it wasn't a myriad of demons worshipping him. Instead, they condensed into a huge, blurry demonic shadow that drew on the power of the entire primitive devil cave. It was like the legendary primordial heavenly demon, the sovereign of all demons. It crushed everything in the world, leaving only endless demonic chi around it. Endless demonic pressure surged forth. It was like Renaga was fighting against the entire primitive devil cave. His Brahma Dharma idol instantly shattered, and he coughed up a mouthful of golden blood. His face was deathly pale. Chapter 1440. Renaga was so angry that he wanted to kill someone. However, he didn't want to kill Chushio. Instead, he wanted to strangle Monk Lanta to death. This guy had a well-thought-out plan. He'd explained everything clearly and logically, but he'd neglected the most important point: Chushio's strength. Renaga had seen Chushio fight Yama with his own eyes. At that time, Chushio was only at the 5th heavenly layer, but when he faced Yama, he was only at a disadvantage in terms of strength. With his great strength, he could even exchange a few blows with Yama without being defeated. Now that Chushio had reached the 7th level, not only had he made up for his only weakness, but he'd even managed to suppress him in terms of strength. How was he supposed to fight this? Even if the three of them joined forces, they still wouldn't be able to defeat Chushio. The original god charged forward again, but Chushio slapped him to the ground again. Although the original god was considered a perfect creature, even a perfect creature had to cultivate. He could cultivate to perfection, but that didn't mean he was perfect from the moment he was created. Hence, although the original god was considered very strong by other warriors, he was only able to take a few hits at most to Chushio. He basically posed no threat to him. Mu Baishuang had the broken sword from the sword despair domain, and a single slash from his sword had the power of a cultivator at the 8th level. However, the problem was that even a genuine 8th level martial immortal like Renaga couldn't defeat Chushio. The threat he posed to Chushio was extremely limited. If you want to defeat Chushio, then stop him and buy me time. I only need 10 breaths of time. Don't tell me you two can't even last 10 breaths of time. As Renaga's voice fell, his entire body shone with a dazzling, glass-like brilliance. A pure, holy, glazed golden lotus rose from beneath his feet. Renaga sat cross-legged atop it, his four-faced, four-armed Dharma merging with his body. At this moment he seemed like the reincarnation of the great god Brahma. The original god scanned here and there. His way of thinking was always simple. Besides taking a gamble, he didn't have any better solution. Thus, the original god's four arms behind his back made fist seals. The powers of the azure dragon, vermilion bird, white tiger and black tortoise created seals, merging with his body. The endless power of the rules proactively flooded the original god. He didn't even need to urge them. At the same time, Mu Baishuang was much more decisive. He directly unleashed all the power of his chi and blood. The scarlet blood combined with the sharpness of the sword chi and actually repaired the broken half of the broken sword. As his sword slashed down, boundless sword energy tore through the void, as if it wanted to split the entire primitive devil cave in two. When he saw this, Monk Long too laughed maniacally, "Ha ha! No matter how many tricks Chu Xiu had up his sleeves, he still wouldn't be able to salvage the situation. When the Lord descends, I will be able to solve everything. I will be the #1 hero under the Lord. Just as he finished laughing maniacally, LV Fengxian's blood and qi suddenly erupted, and a powerful scorching energy fused into his unparalleled heavenly halberd. The simplest laws of strength shook the void, and as he let out a low bellow, his voice actually caused the entire void to explode. Brother Chu won't lose, we won't lose either. Halberd smashed down. The power was so strong that it instantly caused the surrounding space to tremble crazily. Even the surrounding demon energy in the primitive devil cave surged into Lu Fengxian's body. Even if Marquis Lu Wenhou came back to life, he wouldn't be able to use Lu Fengxian's charm. Perhaps Marquis Lu Wenhou was stronger, but the charm of this halberd belonged to Lu Fengxian. There was a loud explosion. Monk Long too was directly sent flying by this halberd. The Buddhist light around him shattered and his entire arm turned to dust. His body was also full of cracks. Lu Jianghe chuckled coldly and said, "Fengxian brat, show mercy. Our sect leader said to keep these guys alive. Monk Long too, it's time for us to settle the debt from back then. Just you wait and see how I will deal with you." Monk Long too snorted coldly, "Lu Jianghe, a joke like you wants to capture me? Are you worthy? In the past, in the Kunlun devil cult, you were just a joke. You were born a pirate and had a lowly status. You even dare to compare yourself to the 5th demon venerable. You simply don't know your place. After being sealed for 500 years, you are still the same. I heard that you still admire the Red Lotus demon venerable? Ah, what a joke." The moment he said this, the smile on Lu Jianghe's face gradually disappeared. It became incomparably gloomy and terrifying. The atmosphere in the primitive devil cave was even colder. *CK your mother. In the next moment, Lu Jianghe directly let out a furious roar. Countless blood and demonic qi revolved around his body, forming a huge black and red spiral spear. At a speed that Wei Shuya and the others couldn't react to, it directly pierced through the void, passing through layers of space, tearing apart all laws, and instantly pierced through Monk Long Tu's entire body. Looking at the wound on his chest that was surrounded by blood and demonic qi, Monk Long Tu raised his head and looked at Lu Jianghe in disbelief. It was as if he didn't want to admit that he would actually die in the hands of such a joke. Lu Jianghe's sudden attack was not inferior to Lu Fengxian's extremely powerful halberd strike. Moreover, it was extremely fast, directly tearing through space and time. It was even more terrifying. The way Mei Qinglian looked at Lu Jianghe changed a little. She decided not to laugh at Lu Jianghe in the future. Previously, in the entire Kunlun demon sect, although Lu Jianghe's seniority was very high, being the hall master of the Kunlun demon sect 500 years ago, his personality was something that no one could bring themselves to respect. Therefore, even Mei Qinglian would always make fun of him. However, Lu Jianghe's furious expression and extremely violent attack just now made them see a different Lu Jianghe. Lu Jianghe also had a bottom line. Usually he was carefree and a little unruly. However, once someone touched his bottom line, he would suddenly explode. This was the real Blood Sea Demon Venerable. Just as everyone was silent, Lu Jianghe suddenly slapped his thigh. *CK. Why did this guy die just like that? The sect master wants him alive. The merit is gone now. Everyone looked at Lu Jianghe, who gently shook his head. It was easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change a person's nature. At this moment, Mu Baishuang and the original god on Chu Xiu's side were using all of their strength. Their power was also shocking. That was why Monk Longtu was so confident. However, facing the two's attacks, the third eye on Chu Xiu's forehead emitted a dazzling divine light. Yin and Yang powers intertwined. As Chu Xiu clasped his hands together, the sky and earth became clear and the earth became muddy. They were like a millstone crushing each other. The entire sky and earth covered Mu Baishuang and the original god. The broken sword in Mu Baishuang's hand shone with an incomparably sharp light. Even if the sky and earth merged, it would still slash this part of the sky and earth. The two horns on the top of the original god's head represented the Yin and Yang powers. They protected his body and used all of their strength to resist the power of the Yin-Yang millstone. Within the entire primitive demon cave, rumbling sounds gradually spread out. And this time the Yin and Yang forces were no longer balanced. Because they were in the primitive demon cave, the Yin attribute power was clearly stronger than the Yang attribute power. The two of them were directly crushed to the ground. However, before they could relax after this attack, Chu Xiu's hands seemed to be hugging each other. The scorching power was evolving. The yin and yang power fragments scattered in the space were all turned into chaotic power under this power. It trapped them and burned them constantly. Good fortune furnace. Yin and yang were separated, creating chaos. Under this power, Mu Baishuang could no longer resist. Instead, he released all the sword energy in his body to protect himself. The original god's 4 arms made hand seals at the same time. He even tore a cut on the 2 horns on his head. Black and white liquid flowed out, turning into the extreme yin and yang power to protect his body, counteracting the power of the good fortune furnace. How long do you want us to hold on for? Mu Baishuang shouted at Renajali. As Mu Baishuang's voice fell, Renajali was finally ready to attack. Or rather, he could finally attack. The golden lotus bloomed, a powerful force surging. Renajali's figure was in the center of the lotus petals. However, he was currently shrouded in golden light, like the legendary Brahma heaven. The vitality of good fortune illuminated the entire primitive demon cave. This power actually changed the origin demon chi in the primitive demon cave, opening up a pure land. After withdrawing the power of the good fortune furnace, Chu Xiu's third eye condensed all the origin demon chi. The entire primitive devil cave seemed to come alive at this moment. Countless demonic shadows roared as they flew over from all directions, rushing towards the pure land that Renaga had opened up. They wanted to extinguish the last bit of light in this devil cave. Just as everyone thought that Renajali's next attack would be earth-shattering, the golden lotus beneath him bloomed. It actually tore open a portal filled with spatial storms in the void. Golden glazed Buddhist light enveloped Renaga's body, and he actually dove into the spatial storm, disappearing without a trace. Chu Xiu was stunned. He immediately retracted his power and placed his hand on the hilt of the formation-breaking saber at his waist. However, he did not slash out in the end. It wasn't that he didn't want to attack, but that he couldn't catch up. No one had expected that Renajali, who had used all his strength, would actually open up a spatial crack in the primitive demon cave to escape. The golden glazed Buddhist light and the lotus around him probably weren't prepared for Chu Xiu. He probably wanted to escape into the spatial storm to protect himself. The distance was too far, and it was unknown whether the clear sky illuminating shadow could affect anyone who fell into the spatial storm. Chu Xiu didn't want to waste his energy. Hence, he turned his gaze to the origin god and Mu Baishuang. This made their scalps go numb. Chapter 1441. The original god and Mu Baishuang had been tricked by Monk Long Tu and Renaga. If Monk Long Tu had tricked them unintentionally, then Renaga had done it on purpose. Monk Long Tu's plan wasn't wrong. His mistake was that he underestimated Chu Xiu's sudden increase in strength. He also didn't expect that the power in primitive devil cave could actually make Chu Xiu strong to such an extent. As for Renaga, after Monk Long Tu died, he wasn't prepared to fight Chu Xiu head-on. This was primitive devil cave, and Chu Xiu was the devil sect master. This was Chu Xiu's home field. His power could be replenished in time here, but he had to expend even more power to suppress the powerful devil chi here. Moreover, Chu Xiu was already at the 7th level of the heaven. Chu Xiu's power was even stronger than his own at the 8th level. If this continued, he would definitely be the one to die. That was why he had used Mu Baishuang and the original god to stop him and tear a spatial crack to escape. Primitive devil cave was a world of its own, but it wasn't a great world like the upper and lower realms. Even if he fell into a spatial storm, he could survive with his power. Chu Xiu turned his gaze to the original god, his eyes flashing with a cold light. Without waiting for the original god to speak, Shi Yin immediately performed the hand seal. 6 Saha splendor wheels emerged, covering the original god who was wounded badly. At the same time, the 6 paths reincarnation bracelet in Chu Xiu's hand spun frantically, pulling the original god's mind power. Chu Xiu took a step forward and arrived in front of the original god. He placed one hand on the original god's head. His power exploded and instantly destroyed the original god's primordial spirit. Chu Xiu put the original god's perfect body back into his secret storage box. He wasn't interested in corpses, but the original god's corpse was very useful to Chu Xiu. It could even be said that the original god's corpse itself was a treasure. It had been created with all the resources of the original god palace. Chu Xiu turned to look at Mu Baishuang, his eyes filled with killing intent. The World Sword Sect and Chu Xiu mainly had a conflict of ideologies. Both parties actually did not have any personal grudges. But at that time, one side represented the eastern region, while the other represented the southern region. Sooner or later there would be a battle. Ever since he descended to the lower realm, the sword sects of the world did not come looking for trouble with him. It could be considered as keeping a low profile. Chu Xiu was prepared to let this matter go. However, he didn't expect Mu Baishuang to dare to attack again. Since that was the case, he couldn't blame him for being ruthless. The incense could only be burned once, and the second time could be directly expiated. Mu Baishuang let out a long sigh. There was no fear in his eyes, only a hint of unwillingness. In the world of great battles, the sword sect of the world still did not have the luck to stand at the peak. No matter how they planned, they still failed in the end. The broken sword in his hand was still shining with sword chi that soared to the heavens. Just as he was about to pick up the broken sword and fight with all his might, seventh young master Fang suddenly said, "Brother Chu, wait." Fang Qishao walked out and smiled bitterly at Chu Xiu. "Brother Chu, actually, I wanted to ask you to let the world sword sects go. But I also know that this matter is a little too much. So, if the world sword sects are willing to submit to the Kunlun devil cult, can you let them go?" Chu Xiu sighed and said, "Of course I will let them go. But do you think the world sword sects will admit defeat so easily? Even if the world sword sects don't submit, I can let Mu Baishuang go today. But no one can guarantee that the world sword sects won't continue to be enemies with me. Most of the sword cultivators are very stubborn. A sword cultivator would rather break than bend. Although they are stubborn, they are not flexible. You know this." Based on the relationship between Fang Qishao and Chu Xiu, since he had spoken, it would not be a problem for Chu Xiu to let Mu Baishuang go. If it wasn't for Fang Qishao's timely reminder, although Chu Xiu could have withstood the sneak attack of the original god, he was suffering from the worship of 10,000 demons and was absorbing the power of the demon puppets. He would have been injured. Moreover, since Fang Qishao was involved with the world sword sects, it was Chu Xiu's fault. He was the one who sent Fang Qishao to the world sword sects. But just as he had said he could let the world sword sects go a second time, but he could not let them go a third time. With the stubborn character of the world sword sects, they would definitely not choose to submit. As expected, Mu Baishuang shook his head expressionlessly and said, "Fang Qishao, although you joined the world sword sects as a spy, we all have our own masters. I don't hate you. The world sword sects were careless. Since it has been done, there is no room for regret. The world sword sects will not submit just like that. The sword may be broken, but the dignity of a sword cultivator remains." Fang Qishao suddenly asked, "What is a sword?" Mu Baishuang wanted to say it out of instinct, but the words were stuck in his throat. What was a sword? After so many years, his sword cultivation had reached the peak and he had ascended to the martial immortal realm. But he did not seem to have thought about what a sword was. Fang Qishao sighed and said, "They say that a sword cultivator would rather break than bend. In reality, why must he be so stubborn? Is the inheritance of the sect more important or the dignity of a sword cultivator? Sect leader, a sword is a sword, a weapon. Why must you give it so many meanings?" What is the meaning of the existence of the world sword sects? Encompassing the sword principles of the world and passing down the lineage of the sword is the true meaning of the world sword sects. It is not the so-called dignity of a sword cultivator. There is a sword only when there are people. Without people, the sword is just a dead object. It is a weapon. As Fang Qishao spoke, he suddenly extended his hand and grabbed the broken sword in Mu Baishuang's hand. There was a tremor on the broken sword. In the end, all the sword aura disappeared and Fang Qishao held it in his hand. Mu Baishuang widened his eyes in disbelief. The broken sword came from the Thousand Swords' unique domain and it was filled with extremely powerful sword aura. Monk Longtu did not even dare to move. He could only suppress it by relying on his sword aura cultivation of the seventh heaven. Yet, at that moment, the seventh young master Fang, a cultivator who had yet to reach the martial immortal realm, was actually so easily captured by him. In fact, he seemed to be even more relaxed than Chu Feng. There was no backlash at all. Fang Qishao picked up the broken sword in his hand and weighed it. He said, "For so many years, the world sword sects have always acted like swords. Even if they knew that it was a dead end, they would still move forward. In fact, as long as they took a slight turn, they would see a different scenery. For example, the sword aura of this sword. Sect leader, you used your own power to suppress the sword aura from the beginning and forcibly controlled it. But why didn't you think of using your own power to guide the sword aura and let it naturally be used by you? I can do it and so can you, sect leader." After the world sword sects descended to the lower world, they have never cooperated with the sects in the lower world. Now that I am the sect leader of Sword King City, I am willing to join forces with the world sword sects to recruit sword cultivators from the lower world and establish the World Sword Alliance. At the same time, I will form an alliance with the Kunlun Devil cult. Just like High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion in the upper world, we will follow the lead of the Kunlun Devil cult. This is all I can do. The future of the world sword sects depends on sect leaders' decision. The expression on Fang Qishao's face was rare at this time. Mei Qinglian looked left and right and suddenly found that everyone seemed to be hiding another side. Of course, for Fang Qishao this might be growth. The world sword sects did not have any enmity with Sword King City as long as they did not care about the fact that Fang Qishao had been a spy. The two of them joined forces to establish the World Sword Alliance. It could be said that it was a gathering of the strongest Sword Dao sects in the upper and lower worlds and could also absorb many Sword Dao rogue cultivators. At the same time, they surrendered to the Kunlun Devil cult as the World Sword Alliance. Not only did they give Chu Xiu an explanation, but they also gave the World Sword sects a way out. After all, it was not the Kunlun Devil cult that the World Sword sects surrendered to, but the Kunlun Devil cult that the World Sword Alliance surrendered to. Although it was actually the same meaning, it could also make the stubborn swordsmen of the World Sword sects feel less embarrassed. Even Chu Xiu had to admit that Fang Qishao's actions could be said to be a win-win situation for all three parties. With the Kunlun Devil cult's explanation, the World Sword sects had a way out. The Sword King City merged with the World Sword sects. Although the Sword King City was weak now and did not have much say with Fang Qishao's growth in the future, who else would be the alliance master of the World Sword Alliance but him? Therefore, after this series of actions, in fact, all three parties did not suffer any losses. Mu Baishuang smiled bitterly and nodded. From now on, you are the alliance master of the World Sword Alliance. This sword will also be under your control. Fang Qishao handed the broken sword back to Mu Baishuang and shook his head. This sword is not bad. The position of Alliance Master is more prestigious than the Sect Master. However, strength is still important in the pugilistic world. I am not even a martial immortal, so wouldn't I be a laughing stock if I became the Alliance Master? Therefore this sword should still be controlled by the Sect Master. No, it should be controlled by the Alliance Master. Mu Baishuang did not decline. He took the broken sword and nodded. He then awkwardly bowed to Chu Xiu and said, Cult Master Chu, please forgive me if I have offended you. If it was someone thick-skinned and black-hearted, even if they were fighting to the death just now, they would still be able to change factions easily, just like Xikong Tan. However, Mu Baishuang was, after all, a Sword Dao martial immortal. He was straightforward and very overbearing. It was already very rare for him to be able to do this. Chu Xiu nodded and did not mind. He was not a pompous person. He would only feel comfortable hearing people call him the Sect Master and unify the pugilistic world. Although it felt good to be flattered. It was a pleasant surprise to be able to subdue the World Sword Sect for his own use. Although the World Sword Sect had been crippled during the attack on the East region, their overall strength was still there. The overall strength of the disciples in the sect was very extraordinary. If used well, they would be of great help. After the matter was settled, Chu Xiu also looked at the origin of diabolism on the high tower. The previous series of battles did not cause the origin of diabolism to fluctuate at all. It was still standing on the high tower. This time there should be no one to disturb him, right? Chapter 1442. Compared to the first time he obtained the origin, Chu Xiu was much more familiar with the process this time. Standing on top of the tower, Chu Xiu's third eye blossomed, guiding the yin and yang origin power within his body to envelop the devil path origin. In an instant, the devil path origin bloomed with a pitch-black light and actively integrated into Chu Xiu's body. Origin power could attract each other. Since Chu Xiu had an origin in his body, it was much easier for him to absorb other origins. This seemingly inconspicuous strand of demonic qi surged into Chu Xiu's body, but it gave him an even greater power than when the demonic qi from the worship of 10,000 demons had entered his body. Furthermore, it had erupted in an instant. At this moment, Chu Xiu's entire body was shrouded in layers of black devil qi. A powerful force surged within Chu Xiu's body, even triggering the originally quiet yin and yang origin. At this moment, it was also agitated and overflowing with power. The three origins were also overflowing with power, which was somewhat beyond Chu Xiu's imagination. He let out a wild roar and demonic aura soared into the sky, causing the void space to tremble. Even Chu Xiu's body started to show signs of cracks. However, under the cracks on Chu Xiu's body, what gushed out was not blood, but thick strands of devil qi. At this moment, Chu Xiu could only use all his strength to forcibly suppress the restless power of the origins. At the same time, he tried his best to keep it in his body and improve his cultivation. Early 7th level, middle 7th level, peak 7th level. At the moment when his aura climbed to the peak, Chu Xiu still wanted to desperately integrate power into his body, but the restless power of the three origins made Chu Xiu unable to suppress it. With a roar, he directly punched out, releasing all the power in an instant. Wherever the fist passed, space was directly torn apart. It was like a long river with no end in sight. The primitive devil cave was a small world of its own. It was the kind of small world that had its own source, so it was extremely tough. Previously, Renaga had used all his strength to tear open a spatial door, but now the power of Chu Xiu's punch was 10 times, maybe even 100 times stronger. Chu Xiu let out a long breath. After the power of the third origin was released, it had finally taken root in his body. Unfortunately, he did not manage to step into the 8th heaven with the help of the origin energy. If Chu Xiu had continued to insist on being brave and forcefully swallowed that energy, he would have been seriously injured. Chu Xiu didn't know if he could step into the 8th heaven, but he would have to lie in bed for a long time. Landing on the ground, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I have obtained the origin source. We can leave now. Sect Master Mu, the alliance between Sword King City and the Sword Sect can be carried out now. I'm afraid I'll need your help in the future." Mu Baishuang was slightly taken aback. He was still not used to Chu Xiu's orders. But no matter how unaccustomed he was, he had to accept his fate. Mu Baishuang asked, "What does Cult Master Chu intend to do with the Sword Sect, the World Sword Alliance?" Chu Xiu laughed coldly. "This time, the Sanskrit sect wanted to find trouble with me, causing me to be unable to step into the 8th heaven. How can I just let this matter go? There is still an origin source in the Sanskrit sect. They made me unable to step into the 8th heaven, so naturally I have to demand this karma from them." Among the people who had come to besiege Chu Xiu, Monk Long Tu and the original god were dead. Mu Baishuang had descended, so there was only the Sanskrit sect left. There was still an extreme yang origin source in the Sanskrit sect. If he could obtain it and form another pair of yin-yang origin source, Chu Xiu would definitely be able to step into the 8th heaven. Although Renaga had escaped, he could run away, but he couldn't run away from the temple. Mu Baishuang sighed inwardly. At the same time he felt lucky. With Chu Xiu's vengeful personality, if he didn't surrender now, the World Sword Sect would probably not be able to protect itself in the future. Chu Xiu's way of doing things was really different from the Daluotian forces and sections. Over the past 10,000 years, most of the Daluotian sects had been passed down from ancient times. It wasn't because they were powerful but because of a habit. Although the Daluotian sects also schemed against each other and had all sorts of conflicts, it was rare for them to use all their strength to fight to the death. Even the Sanskrit sect and the Heavenly Luo Temple, which had a deep hatred for each other, wouldn't do that. Everyone controlled the conflicts within a very small area. This way, even if they lost, it would only be a small loss. Then, they would accumulate their strength and fight again the next time. Someone like Chu Xiu, who definitely didn't hold grudges overnight, would immediately fight to the death. It was almost impossible to find someone like him in the Daluotian world. Even when Cold River City had risen, they wouldn't do this. After the group left Primitive Devil Cave, Sword King City prepared to form an alliance with the World Sword Sect. This would take some time. At the same time, Chu Xiu wasn't prepared to act now. He first returned to the Southern Barbarian Branch Palace to cultivate in seclusion for a period of time. Chu Xiu's strength had skyrocketed from the early stage of the 7th heaven to the peak of the 7th heaven. Thus, he needed some time to familiarize and adapt to this power. At this time in the Sanskrit sect, when Yama saw Renaga's pale face fleeing back to the Sanskrit sect, he couldn't help but be shocked. "What happened? Didn't Monk Longtu say that you went to attack Chu Xiu?" Even if Chu Xiu didn't die, how did you end up in such a sorry state? Although Yama and Renaga had some conflicts in the past and didn't really like each other, he was still convinced by Renaga's strength. If he didn't use his trump cards and erupted with the peak state of his youth, he definitely wouldn't be able to defeat Renaga. Moreover, even if he recovered to his peak state with Renaga's tenacity, he would still be the one to be exhausted to death. Against Chu Xiu, whose strength was far inferior to his, and with so many people surrounding him, how could Renaga end up in such a sorry state? Renaga's expression darkened. "Don't say any more. We miscalculated. Monk Longtu, that idiot. He only calculated our strength, but he didn't calculate Chu Xiu's strength. I don't know when, but Chu Xiu has already stepped into the 7th heaven, and his strength is even stronger than mine. Moreover, we all forgot that Chu Xiu is the Devil sect leader. Primitive Devil Cave is his home field. He can use all the devil puppets there, and the amount of devil chi he can mobilize is also much stronger than ours. As a result, we were all defeated by Chu Xiu alone. Monk Long Tu is already dead, and the other two are likely unable to hold on either. I could only escape for now. I suffered some injuries in the primitive devil cave, so I will be in closed-door training for the time being. Notify the disciples to go out less, and activate defensive formations to guard against Chu Xiu's attacks. Yama frowned. Aren't you making too much of a fuss over nothing? You also said that Chu Xiu only took advantage of the primitive devil cave's geographical advantage, that's why your plan failed. Now that you've escaped, can Chu Xiu bring out the primitive devil cave to attack our Sanskrit sect? Renaga shook his head and said, just do as I say. It's better to be safe than sorry. As an 8th heaven martial immortal, although Renaga lost to Chu Xiu, it was as Yama said, he didn't think he was inferior to Chu Xiu. He just happened to be unlucky to be in Chu Xiu's home field. However, Renaga had already investigated Chu Xiu. He was extremely ruthless and vengeful. This time they ambushed him. There was no guarantee that Chu Xiu wouldn't take revenge. Renaga felt that the Sanskrit sect had 2 8th heaven martial immortals, 6 other martial immortals from the lower realms, and a grand formation from the Daluotian, so they shouldn't be afraid of Chu Xiu. However, Chu Xiu's methods couldn't be judged by common sense. If Chu Xiu really attacked, the Sanskrit sect wouldn't be able to withstand such a huge blow. After all, there was still the heavenly treasure temple eyeing them covetously. A month later, Chu Xiu had more or less stabilized his power. It was time for him to think about how to deal with the Sanskrit sect. A gentleman's revenge was never too late. As long as there was an opportunity, Chu Xiu wouldn't even wait for 2 hours. In his primordial spirit, Chu Xiu used a secret technique to contact the inner demon who was bewitching the Sky Emperor Palace's palace master. Right after the connection was made, the inner demon's voice was heard. Oh, it's been a long time since you last contacted me. I thought you'd forgotten about me. Compared to before, the inner demon seemed to be much livelier. Perhaps it was because he had been a human for a long time, but he was gradually becoming a real living being, a real human. How could I forget about you before the Sanskrit sect is completely dealt with? What's your position in the Sanskrit sect now? The inner demon said, I'm still bewitching the Sky Emperor Palace's palace master. But Yenma trusts me very much. He even told me that when the Sanskrit sect master returns, the position of the Lord of Vishnu Palace will be mine. By the way, it seems like you're preparing to deal with the Sanskrit sect? What do you need me to do? Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, don't make any strange moves for now. You only have one chance to make a move. When it's really critical, I'll inform you in advance. After cutting off the connection with the inner demon, Chu Xiu immediately summoned all the people under the Kunlun devil cult, except for those in the Divine Cloud Realm and the Imperial Sky Pavilion. Although these 2 sects had expressed their allegiance to Chu Xiu didn't want to use them. It wasn't because he was worried that these 2 sects would betray him, but because they were originally Daluotian sections. If Chu Xiu was still the master of the East Territory, it wouldn't be a problem to use them. But now that Chu Xiu had the identity of a martial artist from the lower realm, it seemed a little awkward. Of course, it wouldn't be a problem to use the sword sect under the heavens. The Imperial Sky Pavilion and the High Heaven sect took the initiative to surrender to Chu Xiu. In return for a plum, Chu Xiu naturally had to take care of their thoughts. However, the sword sect under the heavens surrendered after being defeated by Chu Xiu. To put it bluntly, they had already surrendered. Why would they have so many thoughts and requests? Chapter 1443. Kunlun Devil Cult, in the main hall of the Southern Barbarian Branch Temple. All the martial immortals who had been in seclusion had come out and gathered in the main hall. Wei Shuya, Shang Tianliang, Lu Jianghe, Lu Fengxian, Qinqing Di, Mei Qinglian, Su Tianya and Fang Baidu. A total of 8 martial immortals were here. With these martial immortals and Chu Xiu, it could be said that the current Kunlun demon sect already had the qualifications to fight against the Brahmin sect head-on. There was no longer any need for them to use underhanded schemes to force the Brahmin sect to take a step back. Looking at the crowd below, Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, next, I plan to unify all the forces of the Kunlun devil cult and attack the Sanskrit sect head-on. Does anyone have any objections? If they had heard Chu Xiu say this in the past, they would have thought that Chu Xiu was crazy. But now, everyone felt that it was normal. Even Fang Baidu and Su Tianya, the 2 Daluotian martial immortals, did not feel that anything was wrong. Chu Xiu even dared to go against the 3 pristine temple. What could the Sanskrit sect do? Wei Shuya said in a deep voice, there are 2 problems. First, we will attack the Sanskrit sect with all our strength. What if someone interferes? Second, with your current strength, it won't be a problem for you to fight Renaga and Yenma. If the two of them join forces, this battle will be dangerous. With Chu Xiu's strength and the abilities he had displayed in the past, no one would doubt Chu Xiu, nor would they dare to doubt Chu Xiu. Only Wei Shuya was qualified to raise some questions and suggestions at this time. Chu Xiu nodded and said, Elder Wei, don't worry. I have already considered the two problems you mentioned. There are not many forces in the entire pugilistic world that are qualified to stop me. The Heavenly Luo Temple is one, but it will not make a move. Although I've fallen out with the Heavenly Luo Temple because of the Great Light Temple and Sabodhi Monastery, the Heavenly Luo Temple hates the Sanskrit sect even more. If I were to destroy the Sanskrit sect, the Heavenly Net Treasure Rakshasa would definitely not interfere. In fact, it would even add fuel to the fire. At this point, Chu Xiu sneered and said, Of course, in the eyes of those monks, perishing together is the best choice. There's also the Star River Martial Institution's Fang Daochen who might interfere. However, it's not that I look down on Fang Daochen, but the chances of him interfering are slim. Fang Daochen was not Meng Xinghe. He was used to being cautious, and he had no right to interfere in such matters. If Fang Daochen makes a move, please ask Venerable Guyu and Divine General Zhenlong to stop him. If Su Qianya and Fang Baidu join forces, it would not be a problem for them to defeat a seventh heaven martial immortal. More importantly, their unique martial arts techniques allowed them to coordinate with one another. Even if they couldn't take down the other party, they could at least stall the other party until Chu Xiu destroyed the Sanskrit sect. Su Qianya and Fang Baidu nodded their heads. Although they were somewhat unwilling to join Chu Xiu's forces at the start, they were still a little unwilling. However, as Chu Xiu became more and more powerful, and the Kunlun devil cult became more and more powerful, they were no longer reluctant. Chu Xiu even dared to challenge the Three Pristines Temple and won. If they were defeated by him, it would not be a shameful thing to seek refuge with the Kunlun devil cult. In this way, there's only one sect that is really powerful enough to intervene, and that's the Three Pristines Temple. Although Dao Master had always maintained a quiet and indifferent appearance when he was in the Daluotian, in fact, all the disputes of the Daluotian were under his control. Although Dao Master is not here now, the stability of the mortal world is also the most important. Moreover, Zheng Tai and Hua Gongbi were forced to retreat by me last time, and they were not reconciled to it. This time it's very likely that they will intervene. I've already asked the World Sword Sect, or to be precise the current World Sword Alliance, to stop the Three Pristines Temple. Although Mu Baishuang should not be able to stop the two of them, he only needs to delay them for a few hours so that they can leave West Chu later. As for how to deal with the two Eighth Heaven martial artists from the Sanskrit sect, it's simple. I've already thought of a helper. The Supreme Heavenly Demon of the Sky Devil Palace. In the Sky Devil Palace, when the Supreme Heavenly Demon saw Chu Xiu again, he suddenly shivered. He had no choice but to lower his head. His strength had not recovered, and there was nothing he could do to deal with this damn junior. Was he going to be beaten up again? Kid, I've already told you the location of the primitive devil cave. You can't blame me for not being able to find it. I don't know its exact location now. The Supreme Heavenly Demon said cautiously. After being beaten up twice, he had learned his lesson. He tried his best not to go against them. When his strength recovered, he would settle the score with them. Chu Xiu smiled and said, Senior, don't worry. I'm not here to target you. I've already found the primitive devil cave, and the harvest is not small. Thank you for your information. The way Chu Xiu addressed him as senior made the Supreme Heavenly Demon's hair stand on end. When did this arrogant and ruthless junior become so polite? The Supreme Heavenly Demon said directly, Kid, just say what you want. There's no need to play this game with me. Although the Supreme Heavenly Demon was a madman, he was also a top expert of the Demon Dao in the past. What had he not seen? Since Chu Xiu was so polite to him, he must have some ulterior motives. Chu Xiu said lightly, I've already said that I'm not here to target you. You don't have to be so vigilant. I heard that after I left, Buddhist sect's Renaja also came and beat you up, forcing you to reveal the whereabouts of the primitive devil cave. So, Senior, do you hate him? Do you want to take revenge? The devil energy around the Supreme Heavenly Demon pulsed. In fact, he wanted to say that compared to Renaja he hated Chu Xiu even more. However, he didn't dare say this in front of Chu Xiu. Of course I hate him. Chu Xiu waved his hand and said, It's easy if you hate him. As he said this, Chu Xiu took out the original god's corpse and placed it in front of the Supreme Heavenly Demon. Right now, my Kunlun devil cult is preparing to attack Buddhist sect, and I would like to invite Senior to help. This body is a perfect life form original God created by the original God Palace. It definitely meets the requirements for possession. As long as you agree to help me deal with Buddhist sect, this body is yours. Hearing this, the Supreme Heavenly Demon didn't say anything, but Yuan Kongqing, who was beside him, widened his eyes in shock. Chu Xiu was going to attack Buddhist sect? Such a big thing was enough to shake the entire underworld. Chu Xiu looked at Yuan Kongqing and smiled. Palace Lord Yuan, I believe you will keep this a secret for me, right? Yuan Kongqing revealed a wry smile upon hearing this. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have come to listen to these things. It was better to be ignorant than to understand. The Supreme Heavenly Demon looked at the original God's corpse and said with disdain, "Why isn't it a human body? What's the difference between this thing and a beast? You want me to possess the body of a beast?" Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "This isn't a beast, but a perfect life form created by imitating the body of an ancient demon god. If Senior thinks that this body isn't good, then when you break through in the future, you can completely reconstruct it. Why bother?" The devil energy around the Supreme Heavenly Demon surged. He thought for a moment and said, "All right. I promise you." In all fairness, the body of the original God was indeed perfect. Although there were still some flaws with the talent of this body, it wouldn't be a problem to cultivate to level 9. Now that the Supreme Heavenly Demon wanted to find a perfect body, it was a pity that he couldn't afford to provoke the bodies he wanted, and he didn't like the ones he could afford to provoke. Hence, with the body of the original God in front of him, the Supreme Heavenly Demon could consider it. As soon as he finished speaking, the primordial spirit of the Supreme Heavenly Demon went into the body of the original God. The next moment, the original God was shrouded in devil energy. He stood up and his power rose to the level of level 8. The previous original God had the power of level 5 or 6, and the Supreme Heavenly Demon had the same power. Hence, it wasn't strange that the power of level 8 was added together. This was also within Chu Xiu's expectations. However, as the Supreme Heavenly Demon's power increased by leaps and bounds, he suddenly laughed wildly. The way he looked at Chu Xiu also became a little teasing. The ignorant junior was still too young. Wasn't a promise meant to be broken? However, at this moment Chu Xiu made a hand seal. In a flash, a scorching power pierced through the body of the Supreme Heavenly Demon. The Supreme Heavenly Demon screamed, and the devil energy around him dissipated. Chu Xiu said faintly, "After getting the body of the original God, I first studied it. His 2 horns, 1 yin and 1 yang, condensed 2 kinds of power. I added some of the yang pole origins power to the horns, which are filled with the power of the yang pole. However, Senior, you don't need to worry. As long as you cooperate with me, I won't use this power. When Senior recovers your strength in the future, you will naturally be able to eliminate this power." Chu Xiu was a man of integrity, but he didn't believe that the Supreme Heavenly Demon would be the same. If you talked about integrity with a lunatic, wouldn't you be a fool? Hence, when he made the decision, Chu Xiu had already done something to the body. The Supreme Heavenly Demon said hatefully, "Brat, you are ruthless." Chu Xiu said faintly, "One must always be on guard against others. Senior, come with me. Help me take care of the Brahmin cult and you will be free." Perhaps it was because he had suffered too many setbacks after being released. This time, the Supreme Heavenly Demon didn't say anything more. He obediently followed Chu Xiu back and prepared to attack the Brahmin cult. After returning to the Kunlun devil cult, Chu Xiu immediately mobilized his forces. At the same time, he also informed the Eastern Qi imperial family to get ready to receive him. He directly mobilized all his forces to attack the Fan cult. Such a large-scale operation couldn't be hidden. Of course, this time, Chu Xiu was prepared to fight openly. There was no need to use any tricks, so there was no need to hide. When this matter came out, it caused a stir in the entire pugilistic world. Whether it was the upper or lower worlds, everyone was shocked. Although the Daluotian and the lower worlds had always been in conflict, Chu Xiu's attack on the Brahmin cult seemed to be able to poke a hole in the sky. Chapter 1444. Inside the Sanskrit sect, Renaga, who was recuperating in seclusion, was interrupted by Yenma. He said unhappily, "Didn't I tell you not to disturb me before I recover?" As the sky collapsed, Yenma said expressionlessly, "It hasn't, but something big has happened. Your jinx has come true. Chu Xiu is really attacking and he's going all out. He's mobilized the entire Kunlun devil cult to attack the Sanskrit sect. I've received news that Chu Xiu is already on his way." Renaja's face was full of disbelief. He muttered, "How is this possible? How dare he? Where does he get his confidence from?" Although he was the one who warned Yanma to be careful, he still couldn't believe that Chu Xiu would actually attack. Chu Xiu actually dared to attack. Yanma said coldly, "Enough, he's already attacked. Why do you care if he dares or not? What's the point of thinking so much? Since Chu Xiu dares to come, we'll just fight him with our full strength. Why would the Sanskrit sect be afraid of Chu Xiu? Before you came out of seclusion, I've already sent people back to the Dalu Ocean and moved some of the Sanskrit sect's trump cards down to the lower realm. If Chu Xiu dares to come, we'll make sure he doesn't return." Although Yanma didn't think as much as Renaga, he was much more decisive than Renaga at this moment. Renaja shook his head lightly. At a time like this, no matter what plans he had, it was useless. He could only do as Yanma said, fight. Inside the Heavenly Treasure Temple, Zen Master Ji Shan and a few other martial immortal heads were discussing how they should view this matter. Ji Kong smiled. "Why are you all so serious? In my opinion, this matter is good no matter how we look at it. If Chu Xiu attacks the Sanskrit sect with his full strength, if he wins, our Heavenly Treasure Temple will have one less enemy. If he loses, the Sanskrit sect will be greatly weakened and we can reap the benefits. So, in my opinion, what's the point of discussing this? Let's just watch the show from the sidelines." The others present also nodded in agreement. As long as it involved the Sanskrit sect, as long as the Sanskrit sect suffered losses, they would be happy. At this moment, Su Yun suddenly said, "Seats, Chu Xiu is from the demonic Tao. His methods are ruthless and his thoughts are vicious. Now that my Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple has enmity with him, why don't we take this opportunity to get rid of him as well?" Zen Master Jishan sighed and said, "It's easy to deal with Chu Xiu, but if we were to provoke him into a desperate situation, he might release the Dalu Ocean. That is something that no one wants to see. Shiyun, we know the enmity between you and Chu Xiu. The hatred of exterminating your sect is indeed irreconcilable. But you have to consider the bigger picture. Let's talk about this later." Su Yun only nodded when he heard Zen Master Ji Shan's words. He did not say much, but a trace of darkness flashed across his eyes. In the Star River Martial Institution, when Fang Daochen received the news, he had a helpless expression. He laughed bitterly and left alone. He did not intend to make a move and only wanted to watch the show. The Star River Martial Institution's foundation was still lacking. Without Meng Xinghe, it was meaningless for them to intervene. The reactions of the major sects were the same as what Chu Xiu had expected. The Star River Martial Institution did not intend to make a move, but the Three Pure Temple wanted to intervene in this matter. After receiving the news, Huagongbi immediately snorted coldly and said, "Chu Xiu is really too arrogant. Does he really think that there's no one in the lower realm who can deal with him?" Zheng Tai shook his head and said, "We can intervene in this matter, but we can't do it by force. This is the enmity between the Sanskrit sect and Chu Xiu. It's not worth dragging us into the cause and effect. It's fine as long as Chu Xiu doesn't act too presumptuously." Huagongbi nodded and said, "I understand. In that case, I won't go this time. You can go instead. Anyway, you are good at this kind of thing. If I go, I'm afraid it will be easy for me to fight with Chu Xiu." Zheng Tai could not help but shake his head when he heard this. He was a little uncertain whether Huagongbi's character was real or fake. After the discussion, Zheng Tai directly left West Chu and headed for Eastern Qi. He was really familiar with this kind of thing. After all, he looked good and his character was reliable enough. Therefore, most of the things that mediated the disputes in the martial world, as long as the Three Pure Temple needed it, would be done by him. Just like the grudge between Chu Xiu and the World Sword sections. This kind of thing could not come too early, but it could not come too late either. It was the most suitable time to come at the moment of life and death. That way the winner would have a harvest and would not be too unwilling. And the loser would be grateful to the Three Pure Temple and earn a reputation after escaping from death. Therefore Zheng Tai wasn't too anxious. Instead he traveled slowly. Just when he walked to the edge of West Chu, Mu Baishuang was there waiting for him with the broken sword in his hand. Zheng Tai asked in surprise, "Sect leader Mu, what are you doing here?" Mu Baishuang said in a deep voice, "I have long heard of your name, but I have never had the chance to learn from you. Therefore, I have a new weapon today and would like to ask you to teach me a few moves." Zheng Tai did not feel that something was wrong at this moment. He waved his hand casually and said, "We can talk about this kind of thing when there is time. I still have something to do today, so I will not accompany you any longer." However, Mu Baishuang did not move aside. He only shook his head and said, "There is no hurry, I will only delay you for a few hours." Seeing Mu Baishuang's attitude, Zheng Tai felt that something was wrong. He said coldly, "What do you mean, sect leader Mu? You should know what I am going to do, so why are you stopping me here?" Mu Baishuang sighed and cupped his hands. "In the martial world, one cannot do as he pleases. Please forgive me." Hearing Mu Baishuang's words, Zheng Tai was sure that he was actually delaying him for Chu Xiu. "Mu Baishuang, could it be that you've forgotten how the previous sect master Luo Shan died? Could it be that you've forgotten who it was that saved your life from the hands of Chu Xiu and the entire sword sect of the world? Now, you are actually helping the evildoer and helping Chu Xiu. I am afraid that your heart of the sword has become crooked." Zheng Tai scolded loudly, but Mu Baishuang lowered his head, looking guilty but absolutely unwilling to give in. Although Zheng Tai was right to scold him for the sake of the sect's legacy, he had to make this choice. "Perfected one, make your move." "Damn it." Zheng Tai cursed, and the Dao sword in his hand was already unsheathed. If he had known that this would happen, he would have brought Hu Gongbi along. That way one could delay Mu Baishuang while the other could rush to Eastern Qi. But it was too late now. Even if he used the secret array disk to send a message to Hu Gongbi, it would be too late. Now he could only hope that the Sanskrit sect and Chu Xiu were also in a stalemate over at Eastern Qi. At this time, the Sanskrit sect's territory had been cleared. It was not the Sanskrit sect's intention to clear it, but those forces who heard that Chu Xiu was going to attack the Sanskrit sect began to evacuate. In the lower realm, Chu Xiu's reputation was even greater than that of the Daluotian warriors. All the warriors of the Kunlun devil cult were dressed in black. The sacred flame flag was unfurled, and a scorching hot current floated in the air. This was the real rootless sacred flame, not a disguise made with an array. Chao Heng and Master Yuanji had studied the rootless sacred flame very thoroughly. Although they could not use it completely, they could use an array to seal a portion of its power in the flag. This way it would not dissipate for a period of time. Groups of black-robed martial artists spread out and stabbed the sacred flame flags in their hands into the ground. Suddenly, countless torrents of fire converged in midair and condensed into a spirit array that enveloped the entire Sanskrit sect. "The sacred flame shall not be extinguished, the devil Tao shall exist forever." Tens of thousands of disciples of the devil cult shouted. Their voices were like thunder, and their demonic flames filled the sky. A cold snort came from within the Sanskrit sect. At the same time, a pitch-black arrow imbued with the power of nirvanic destruction shot out from within the Sanskrit sect, heading straight for the center of the sacred flame array. Chu Xiu's third eye opened, and a huge yin-yang light pillar instantly shattered the arrow. He took a step forward, and Chu Xiu's voice was like thunder, resounding between heaven and earth. "Renaga, I said in the primitive demon cave that no one can escape. You can run away, but can you run away from the temple?" The people of the heavenly Luo temple were watching the battle from afar. When they heard Chu Xiu's words, the monks' faces darkened. What did he mean by the monk could run away but not the temple? Wasn't this pointing at the bald monk and scolding the monks? Of course, today they were here to watch Chu Xiu and the Sanskrit sect fight, so they were too lazy to make a fuss over such a trivial matter. "Chu Xiu, do you know what you're doing?" Renaga and Yenma stepped out of the Sanskrit sect's main hall. Behind them, countless disciples of the Sanskrit sect rushed out, already in formation. "Back in the primitive demon cave, you relied on your geographical advantage to defeat us. It was a miscalculation on our part. We're in the outside world now, so where did you get the courage to kill 2 8th-level existences? And where did you get the courage to destroy my Sanskrit sect? Moreover, you, Chu Xiu, have offended almost all of the Daluotian people. Even if you can really destroy my Sanskrit sect, do you know the consequences? The consequences are that you'll be torn to pieces by the other factions." Renaga didn't say anything about making concessions. As the temple master of the Brahma sect, he had been in charge of it for so many years, so he knew when to make concessions and when to be forceful. Previously, they had already surrounded Chu Xiu, and their true intentions were revealed. They looked like they wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. Making concessions at this time was a little too laughable. Hence, he only pointed out the consequences of Chu Xiu's actions to calm him down. It was possible to kill him, but they had to choose the right time. If they attacked now, the Sanskrit sect wouldn't have it easy, and neither would you, Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu suddenly laughed strangely and said, "Renaga, I finally understand why your Sanskrit sect can't win against the heavenly Luo treasure temple. You're afraid of wolves in front and tigers behind. You have too many things to worry about. You've cultivated the martial path for your entire life, but you can't even settle your debts of gratitude and revenge. How sad is that?" As soon as Chu Xiu finished speaking, he shouted, Open the sacred fire array. Chapter 1445. Chu Xiu was here to kill people, not to reason with Renaja. Mu Baishuang was in West Chu helping him block the people from Three Pristine's temple. He could not afford to waste time here. Countless sacred fire flags emitted a terrifying golden light. The power of the rootless sacred fire burned the void and sealed all the rules. In an instant, the entire Sanskrit sect was engulfed in a sea of fire. Master Yuanji had bragged to Chu Xiu about the power of the sacred fire formation many times. Now it seemed that he was not bragging but taking credit for it. At the same time, in the Sanskrit sect, a seven-colored lotus bloomed. The power of life, destruction, creation, and other powers were being nurtured within it. The light sprinkled down, resisting the power of the sacred fire formation. More than 10 warriors were sitting on the lotus petal, controlling the array formation. In the center was the heart demon who was disguised as Ji Xinlua. In the past, the formations of the Sanskrit sect were controlled by the Vishnu temple. After the Vishnu temple was destroyed, Ji Xinlua was the only one left, so the Sanskrit sect found some people for him to build a small Vishnu temple. Although Ji Xinlua was not the lord of the Vishnu temple, he was still in charge of these people. Under the confrontation of the formation, the entire Sanskrit sect exploded with intense light, covering the void. Wei Shuya stood behind the crowd. He did not make a move, but began to command the disciples of the Kunlun devil cult to attack from different directions. Chu Xiu stood at the peak and used the law phenomenon. When he punched, it was as if he could split the earth. The offensive methods of the Kunlun demon sect had all the martial artists in the great overarching heaven shocked. Although the Daluotian sects were much stronger than those in the mortal world, they had rarely experienced a sect annihilation battle. Even the top sects were the same. Last time, when Chu Xiu and Heavenly Luo Bodhisattva worked together to destroy one of the temples of the Sanskrit sect, it was the biggest battle in thousands of years. This time, the Kunlun devil cult could be considered to have put on a show for them, showing what a real sect annihilation battle was. Every cultivator did not attack recklessly. Instead, under Wei Shuya's command, they used every bit of their strength to the fullest in an orderly manner. In the past, when Wei Shuya was young, he had participated in the Great War of the Righteous Path and the Devil Path in the Ninth Heaven Mountain. After that, he had participated in several great wars of the Righteous Path and the Devil Path. When it came to experience in this aspect, it could be said that no one could compare, including Chu Xiu. As the strongest person in the entire Kunlun devil cult, Chu Xiu only had one role, and that was to defeat the opponent's strongest person, using his peak to fight against the peak. This kind of fighting style had never been seen in the Daluotian. In the past, when they encountered a conflict, they would directly swarm forward. How could they be like Chu Xiu, commanding so many experts and commanding them so calmly? It was as if they were marching in a battle formation. Just how many sect annihilation experiences did the Kunlun devil cult have to go through for them to have such results? Yama's body was surrounded by a blood cocoon. As he walked out of the blood cocoon, he had already transformed from a shriveled old man into a handsome, masculine young man. The pitch-black apocalyptic fire condensed into a long spear, piercing through the void with a single thrust. With a flick, it shook the entire heaven and earth, colliding with Chu Xiu's powerful punch. Instantly, the void trembled and a powerful force exploded. Chu Xiu, do you think you can annihilate my Sanskrit sect just because you want to? Today, I will make sure that you will not return. In fact, this was exactly what Yama wanted to see. He wasn't like Renaja, who had so many considerations and had to consider the consequences of his actions. To Yama, he only wanted to fight to his heart's content, to burn that bastard Chu Xiu to ashes with his apocalyptic fire. Renaga's injuries had not fully healed. But at this time he rushed out to join Yama in attacking Chu Xiu. Everyone thought that, as the most powerful person under the Sanskrit sect's leader and the Brahma temple's leader, Renaga should be very generous. In reality, Renaga was the most unscrupulous one. In the primitive demon cave, he had tricked Mu Baishuang and the original god into helping him buy time, and then he had taken the opportunity to escape. This was the real Renaga. Now, in front of so many spectators, he did not care about being surrounded or attacked. This was already a sect annihilation battle, so why would he care about being surrounded? However, before he could act, Supreme Sky Demon had already arrived in front of him. Seeing that it was actually the original god, Renaga was stunned. Chu Xiu did not kill you? Based on Renaga's understanding of Chu Xiu, this person was extremely ruthless. It was extremely difficult to survive in his hands. At this moment, Supreme Heavenly Demon laughed sinisterly. Damn Junior! Back then, you actually dared to beat me up and even dared to threaten me. Today I will teach you what is called respect. As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Sky Demon's arms formed seals. 9 black demon dragons condensed under his feet, forming a large array that directly surged towards Renaga. Now that he was controlling the original god's body, Supreme Sky Demon's strength could be said to have skyrocketed. Actually, the original god's body had 4 arms. 4-armed seals were the fastest, but he was still not used to it. Seeing Supreme Sky Demon attack, Renaga finally reacted. The original god was already dead and the other party was just a shell. The one inside was actually Supreme Sky Demon. This made Renaga secretly regret his actions. If he had known this would happen, he would have sealed this guy as well. Moreover, back then Chushio had also threatened and beaten him up. Why did this fellow side with Chushio? He was also someone who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Both of them were cursing each other in their hearts. At the same time they began to fight fiercely. For a moment they were evenly matched. Renaga's injuries had not recovered, and Supreme Sky Demon was still a little unfamiliar with his body. Both of them could be said to be not in peak condition. As for Chushio, his fight with Yama was even more intense. Chushio had already fought with a level 8 martial immortal several times. In fact, he knew a lot about this level of martial immortals. Previously, when he fought with Yama, although he did not lose, he was actually at a disadvantage in terms of strength. If he continued to fight, he would undoubtedly lose. But this time, Chushio came with the power of a level 7 martial immortal. With the addition of 3 sources, his strength was even stronger than Yama's when he was in peak condition. Boundless demonic aura surged around Chushio. Demonic shadows coiled around Chushio's lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. With every punch he threw, there was a sharp howl that corroded all the surrounding energy. The techniques of Shiva Palace were the most tyrannical and cruel. They could be said to be the pinnacle of battle. In particular, Yama, who had entered this state, could be said to be half a battle maniac. He was able to unleash his strength to the extreme. Countless apocalyptic flames and blood vessels began to condense. Behind Yama, a 2-faced 4-armed Dharma image of Shiva was formed. The Dharma image of Shiva held a weapon in each of its 4 arms. There was a sword, a spear, a demon-subduing pestle, and even a lotus flower. Yama's figure merged into the Dharma image. As he slashed down with his long sword, a ravine formed by apocalyptic flames was formed. The long spear swept out with power that could shake mountains and rivers. The demon-subduing pestle came crashing down, shattering the void. On the lotus flower, countless black petals floated down. However, upon closer inspection, they were actually spots of apocalyptic flames. Shiva Annihilation Image. This was one of the most powerful mystiques of Shiva Palace. It seemed to have unleashed the Tao of Destruction technique of Shiva Palace to the extreme. Shiva Annihilation Image collided with Chushio's law phenomenon of heaven and earth, which was surrounded by tens of thousands of demonic shadows. In an instant, an extreme power erupted. The long spear tore the demonic shadows apart. However, it was shattered by the law phenomenon of heaven and earth. The demon-subduing pestle shattered one arm of the law phenomenon of heaven and earth. However, it was directly torn apart by the other arm. The 2 Dharma image mystiques clashed in midair. It was as if 2 ancient demons were fighting fiercely. The void let out a series of trembling sounds. It was incomparably shocking. The people who were watching the battle from below had solemn looks in their eyes. This was especially so for the Daluotian martialists such as Fang Daochen and the others. It was not surprising that Yama had such strength. Every generation of Shiva Palace master was a battle maniac. In terms of pure combat strength, Yama was second only to the Brahmin sect master. However, Chushio's combat strength was terrifying. This was especially true for his foundation of power. He had already reached the martial immortal realm. How did Chushio advance so quickly? Even if Chushio had relied on external objects, even though his cultivation had increased very quickly, his power should still be unstable. Thus, why was Chushio's foundation of power so stable? He was even able to suppress a martial immortal of the 8th heaven with the cultivation of 7th heaven? They could not understand. Yama could not understand either. However, Yama was already in a half-crazed state. He could not think too much about it. As their techniques collided, their bodies were already in tatters. The weapons on Yama's 4 arms were all shattered. Chushio's law phenomenon of heaven and earth also lost 2 arms. The surrounding demonic shadows were also destroyed. At this moment, a 3rd eye appeared on the head of Shiva's world annihilation avatar. Endless world annihilation flames gathered in it. The pitch-black flames scorched the void and shot towards Chu Xiu. At this moment, Chu Xiu's third eye also appeared on the forehead of his law phenomenon of heaven and earth. A pillar of light formed from the power of yin and yang exploded and collided with the eye of world annihilation. A violent explosion rang out. The sun could no longer be seen in the sky for dozens of miles. Everything was covered by the chaotic ripples created by the collision of the power of yin and yang. Shiva's world annihilation avatar was destroyed. Chu Xiu's law phenomenon of heaven and earth was also destroyed. Yama suddenly tore his shirt. His upper body was engraved with strange blood-colored Sanskrit characters. At this moment, the Sanskrit characters lit up and dyed his entire body blood red. Chu Xiu's eyes were also filled with fighting spirit. It had been a long time since he had fought to his heart's content. In the past, he was either 100% confident of defeating his opponents, or his cultivation level was lower. Only this battle with Yama gave Chu Xiu the feeling that he was evenly matched. But at this moment, Renaga shouted at Yama, "Idiot! Stop fighting outside. Return to the Sanskrit sect." Chapter 1446. Renaga was truly panicking now. It wasn't that he couldn't defeat the supreme celestial demon, but that the Sanskrit sect was in danger. They could no longer stop the Kunlun devil cult. Actually, the Kunlun devil cult had always given people the impression that Chu Xiu was very strong. Not only was he strong, but the Kunlun devil cult was also very strong. But the Kunlun devil cult was a whole entity. With Chu Xiu's strength, people would naturally overlook the Kunlun devil cult's strength. Even though Renaga had predicted that Chu Xiu would come looking for trouble, he was only worried about Chu Xiu. He hadn't considered the Kunlun devil cult's strength. But in reality, the Kunlun devil cult wasn't weak at all. They were very strong. The disciples participating in the attack on the Sanskrit sect were the Kunlun devil cult's elites. Most of them had followed Chu Xiu through many battles. They had experienced many battles between the righteous and demonic factions, as well as sect annihilation battles. They had rich combat experience. Moreover, they had been cultivating in the celestial absolute celestial for so many years now. Chu Xiu did not have to worry about wasting medicinal pills or whatnot. All the resources were given out according to their strength level, allowing them to gradually catch up with the others. As for the higher ranks, there were powerful hall masters like Tangya and Yen Bugue, who hadn't reached the martial immortal level. At the martial immortal level, Chu Xiu had countless talents under his command. Elder Wei commanded calmly, Xin Xingdi's punches were peerless, Lu Fengxian's halberd smashed everything in its path, Lu Jianghe's techniques were more suited for group battles, Shang Tianliang had a deep foundation, and although Mei Qinglian was a bit weaker, the Red Lotus karmic fire's strangeness made her even more difficult to deal with. There were also Su Tianya and Fang Baidu, who could fight against the Seventh Heaven martial immortal if they worked together. Under their joint attack, the Sanskrit sect's martial artists had suffered heavy casualties and were at a disadvantage on all fronts. Yama, who was in a berserk state, couldn't see these things, but Renaga could. However, it was useless for him to call for Yanma to defend now. At this moment, Yama's mind was filled with battle intent, and there was no room for anything else. Renaga gritted his teeth. His entire body glowed with golden light, transforming into countless Sanskrit threads that temporarily trapped the supreme sky demon. He then returned to the interior of the Sanskrit religion. Activate the formation at full power. Renaga roared at the inner demon. Heart Demon put on a hesitant look and said, "But Hall Master, if you use all your strength to activate the array formation will overload. It won't last long before it collapses. If we don't open it now, the Sanskrit sect will collapse. Open the formation to gain more time. I want to use the life and death Advent Lotus. Later you will replace the position of the Lord of Vishnu Palace." The inner demon's eyes narrowed, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. He knew what he had to do. The life and death Advent Lotus was the trump card of the Sanskrit religion, but it was hard to say what it was. It was a combination of formations, weapon refinement, and even living creatures and plants. It was something that the Lord of Vishnu Palace had spent thousands of years to create. It was originally prepared to fight against the heavenly Luo treasure Buddha. The life and death Advent Lotus contained the rules of life and death, time and space. Once it was activated, it was as if a whole world had descended, and its power was extremely terrifying. However, the only person in the entire Sanskrit religion who could control the life and death Advent Lotus was the master of the Sanskrit religion. Only he had all the power of the three godly temples of the Sanskrit religion. Other than the master of the Sanskrit religion, Only the three godly temples of the Sanskrit religion could work together to activate these three powers. Only then could they use a divine item of this level. The inner demon activated the entire formation in the Sanskrit religion hall to the extreme. In an instant, the sky was filled with the brilliance of the formation path, and countless golden lotuses bloomed. Not only the people of the Kunlun devil cult couldn't break in, but even the supreme sky demon couldn't do anything. Of course, it wasn't that he really didn't have a way. The supreme sky demon's cultivation level in the formation path was actually very strong. Other than martial arts, he was almost proficient in other things like formation path and weapon path. It was just that this time he was forced to come by Chushio. Although Chushio had something on him and he didn't dare to be lazy in the battle, he naturally wouldn't go all out at this time. At this time, Yama had already fought with Chushio to the point of madness. Blood-colored Sanskrit gathered around him, and the black flames of annihilation floated around his body. The next moment, as Yama shouted, countless blood-colored Sanskrit and the flames of annihilation gathered, and actually evolved into thousands of Yama figures that were formed by the power of blood chi and the flames of annihilation. These figures began to dance together. Their movements were beautiful, but they gave off a sense of annihilation and evil. Under this dance of annihilation, everything around them began to collapse, die and disappear. The place where Chushio was at was like an isolated island, and it was getting smaller and smaller as the dance of annihilation devoured it. However, at this moment, Chushio's body was surrounded by demonic chi. What his third eye gathered wasn't the power of yin and yang, but pure demonic chi. After gathering two demonic origins, Chushio's control over demonic chi had increased by a huge level. As the demonic chi condensed to an extreme, Chushio waved his hand, and countless demonic shadows roared and surged towards the incarnation of the dance of annihilation. Only a demon lord could withstand the worship of 10,000 demons. Yama wasn't a demon lord, so he couldn't withstand it. Under this powerful demonic chi, countless demonic shadows exploded in front of him, and he was forced to retreat step by step. Break for me. Endless blood chi turned into a long spear that swept out, directly crushing all the demonic shadows in front of him. However, at the next moment what came in front of him was the power of yin and yang, and it was as though heaven and earth had completely merged at this moment. Heaven and earth millstone. However, this time, the power of the heaven and earth millstone that Chushio used was a little out of balance. The two demonic origins caused the power of yin to surge, and Yama was directly smashed into the ground. Just as Yama struggled to get up and wanted to continue attacking, Rinaja was already prepared. Within the Sanskrit sect, a strange chanting of scriptures sounded out. The strange language seemed to come from ancient times, and even those from the Sanskrit sect couldn't understand it. Glazed light shone brightly, and a huge, resplendent lotus tore apart the Sanskrit sect's hall and rose from the ground. The huge lotus was over 1,000 feet in size. The 9 petals on the outermost layer were white, the 6 petals in the middle were black, and the 3 petals in the very center were gray like the chaotic mist. This lotus seemed to be natural, yet it also seemed man-made. It was extremely strange and extraordinary, and it attracted everyone's attention the moment it appeared. The people from the Skynet temple squinted their eyes and carefully examined it. They had heard of the birth and destruction descending lotus and knew that it was the last trump card of the Sanskrit sect, but they had never seen it before. They didn't expect that Chushio would actually force the Sanskrit sect to use this thing today. No matter the outcome of this battle, the Skynet temple would still have something to gain. The others were also shocked. Only a sect of the level of the Sanskrit sect could have the foundation to create something like this. This kind of mystical item couldn't be created by the power of a generation. It required the accumulation and research of several generations to be able to create it. Perhaps the Kunlun devil cult's strength had increased by leaps and bounds under Chushio's leadership, and they had produced many powerful experts, but there was one thing that couldn't be replicated, and that was a foundation. Rinaja sat on the outermost perimeter of the birth and destruction descending lotus. The huge lotus platform spun, and life and death gathered, transforming into a storm that repelled the people from the Kunlun devil cult and the supreme heavenly demon. But this wasn't enough. Rinaja shouted at the heart demon, "Sit in the center of the lotus platform and use all your strength. At the critical moment, even if you have to burn your chi, blood, and primordial spirit, you have to supply your strength to the lotus platform." Originally, if the Lord of Vishnu Palace was here, it would be very easy for the three of them to control the birth and destruction descending lotus. But now, there was only one person left in the entire Vishnu Palace, so they could only reluctantly pay attention to it. But as long as they used the power of the birth and destruction descending lotus, even if it was only for a few breaths, they could still turn the situation around. At this time, seeing that Yanma was about to continue attacking, Ranaja shouted, and the golden glass Sanskrit voice exploded in Yanma's ears. Enough. Stop fighting. Enter the lotus platform and fight for the last time. The deafening voice resounded in Yamamo's mind, finally suppressing his frenzied battle intent. Seeing that Chushio had already rushed over, Yanma's hand condensed the violent world-extinguishing fire into a huge bow, and suddenly shot it towards Chushio. In an instant, 7 world-extinguishing arrows had already locked onto Chushio, and were shot out. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yanma's figure immediately entered the birth and destruction descending lotus, landing in the center. Seeing that the 3 of them had gathered, Rinaja shouted, "Attack!" In an instant, the 3 of them poured their strength into the birth and destruction descending lotus. The white vitality, the black destruction, and the gray mist that represented the chaos. The 3 types of light suddenly shone brightly. The lotus platform rotated violently, and in an instant the 3 types of power descended, enveloping the surrounding several miles, and even some of the nearby martial artists. They were shocked to find that the world around them had changed. Time and space seemed to have stopped at this moment. They couldn't feel the flow of time, and even the breeze seemed to be frozen in mid-air. Of course, this wasn't the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that they couldn't even control the power of this world. The heaven and earth mystic controlled a part of the world, and martial immortals could directly comprehend the laws of heaven and earth for their own use. But in the area enveloped by the birth and destruction descending lotus, regardless of whether they were martial immortals or heaven and earth mystic cultivators, they couldn't even use a trace of the power of heaven and earth. It was as if they'd been stripped of their power and returned to their original state. Rinaja and Yanma's faces were already pale. Their inner demons had also started burning their blood essence. The 3 of them were laughing. Rinaja and Yanma were laughing happily. Chushio had lost. As for the inner demons, they were laughing strangely, but Rinaja and Yanma didn't notice. Chushio looked at his hands. This power was indeed very strange. He couldn't even borrow the power of heaven and earth, and he couldn't sense the laws. Only the demon source energy and extreme yang source energy in his body weren't affected by this power. However, Chushio didn't panic in the slightest. This was because when he saw the inner demons sitting in the center of the lotus platform and starting to erupt with power, he knew. This wave was stable. Chapter 1447. The moment the life and death descending glory lotus appeared, Ranaga felt his victory was assured. Chushio was merciless in his actions. He was determined to kill them all, forcing them to use their final trump card. Now Chushio, do you regret it? Do you know fear? Ranaga was actually a very realistic person. Everything depended on success or failure. But right now he wanted to see Chushio's expression of regret and fear. But reality disappointed him. Chushio's face showed no fear or regret. There was only a trace of mockery, as if he was waiting to watch a good show. Ranaga felt a little strange. He'd already poured all his power into the life and death descending glory lotus, preparing to use his full strength to completely defeat Chushio. A trump card was a trump card before it was revealed. Once it was used, it was no longer a trump card. Although he'd wasted such a trump card on Chushio, Ranaga felt it was worth it. However, right at that moment, the heart demon at the very center had ignited close to half of his blood. He had now reached the half-step martial immortal realm. His powerful blood energy had pushed his power to the martial immortal realm. Seeing this, Ranaga said in a low voice, "Jishinlua, you don't need to burn so much blood essence. You only need to balance the power of the life and death descending glory lotus. The 2 of us will be the main attackers." Yama nodded in satisfaction. Jishinlua was indeed worthy of being the person he'd chosen. He did his best, unlike the other temple masters of the Brahma temple who would always play tricks. Even at the most crucial moment, they'd still leave some leeway. The corner of Jishinlua's mouth revealed a trace of an unfathomable smile. "Enough? It's not enough. Far from enough." As he spoke, the boundless power of blood essence, the purest power, exploded in the center of the life and death descending glory lotus. With a boom, the spinning birth and extinction lotus was bombarded by this force, and the petals in the center that represented chaotic force were completely shattered. Time and space were no longer frozen, and the power of heaven and earth and the laws had been restored. Life and death descending lotus, the fusion of life and death and chaos into one. Only then could it descend into the mortal world and freeze the world. The chaotic force in the center was completely crippled, and the descent lotus of life and death lost its effect as well. It even constantly shattered. Bastard! Jishinlua, what are you doing? Renaga and Yenma stared at Jishinlua with their eyes wide open. They couldn't believe their eyes. Although they knew that Chushio had once planted spies among the sword sect of the world when he was dealing with them, causing the sword sect of the world to completely fail in their attack on the East region. Ever since that incident, many sects in Exalted Major had investigated their own disciples in order to prevent spies and informants. However, they had never imagined that one of the Sanskrit sect's palace masters, someone who had been groomed by the Sanskrit sect from a young age, would actually be a traitor, a traitor. Jishinlua smiled strangely. Of course I'm doing what I should be doing. Do the two palace masters want to kill me now? There's no need to trouble the two of you. I'll do it myself. As soon as he finished speaking, Jishinlua's body exploded. Blood splattered everywhere, and a spiritual force had already drifted into Chushio's body. The inner demon still had a mark in Chushio's mind. He wasn't a real person. As long as his soul source wasn't destroyed, his physical body was just a shell to him. When there was a chance in the future, he would naturally be able to reconstruct a stronger body. Renaga and Yenma smiled bitterly. They understood. They understood everything. Chushio had been scheming against the Sanskrit sect for a long time. From the day he destroyed the Vishnu palace, he had planted a spy in the Sanskrit sect. Now, that spy had actually grown into a sharp knife, forcefully stabbing into the heart of the Sanskrit sect. At the last crucial moment, it had completely nailed them to death. What they couldn't bear the most was that they were the ones who had allowed this spy to grow. If not for the fact that they valued Jishinlua so much, how could they have allowed him to control the life and death descending lotus? At this time, the martial artists from the other factions all felt a chill run down their spines. The terrifying thing about Chushio wasn't his strength. Instead, it was that when you fought with him, you couldn't imagine what methods he would use to turn the tables. Previously, Chushio had used a spy. This was easy to deal with. They had strictly investigated the new disciples and wanted nothing more than to dig out their ancestors. But now, a high-level martial artist who had clearly grown up in their own sect was actually a spy. He had actually betrayed them. They simply couldn't understand this. At this moment, they even looked at the people around them with deep suspicion. The life and death descending lotus completely shattered. Renaga suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Previously in the primitive demon's cave, Renaga's injuries hadn't completely healed. Just now, he had fought an intense battle with the supreme heavenly demon and forcefully controlled the life and death descending lotus. He had contributed the most. Now that he had suffered such a blow, his state of mind had been damaged. This caused him to instantly spit out blood. I will delay Chushio here. You leave first. Take the rest of the people and escape back to the Daluotian sect. Activate the sect's great protective array and delay until the sect leader returns. Renaga suddenly barked at Yama. Yenma was stunned. He hadn't expected Renaga to let him leave first. He had worked with Renaga for a long time and knew what kind of person he was. Because of their personalities, they didn't get along very well. There had always been competition between the Brahma temple and the Shiva temple. But now, Renaga had decided to bring up the rear and let Yenma escape first. Anyone could tell that Renaga's decision to bring up the rear was akin to suicide. Chushio said indifferently, "Don't worry. None of you will leave today." As soon as he said this, all the disciples of the Kunlun Devil cult stopped fighting and returned to the Kunlun Devil cult's formation. However, they didn't retreat. Instead, under Wei Shiya's command, they infused their power into the sacred flame flag. With a loud explosion, the sacred flame flag shattered. In an instant, countless flames bloomed. The power of the rootless sacred flame burned the power of the natural order. Fire rained down from the sky, causing the entire space to be unable to contain any other power besides the power of the rootless sacred flame. It was extremely overbearing. Run. Don't hesitate. I'm already seriously injured. Even if I escape, it's useless. Delay until the sect leader returns, then kill Chushio and completely destroy the Kunlun Devil cult. No, completely eradicate the demon path. We'll wipe out the entire demon path. Because of the supreme heavenly demon's interference, Renaga had thoroughly hated the heavenly demon palace. In any case, from his point of view, the demonic cultivators of both the upper and lower realms had pledged their allegiance to Chushio. They should all be killed. Yuan Kongqing was afraid that he would also be affected, so he purposely didn't come to watch the battle after hearing the news. Instead, he hid in the Sky Demon Palace and waited for the news to arrive. He hadn't expected that while he was sitting at home, the blame would fall from the sky. Just like that, he was listed on the list of extermination by the Sanskrit sect. After saying that, Ranaja let out a loud roar and the blood in his body began to burn furiously. The violent blood condensed into a blood-colored Brahma Dharma form with 4 faces and 4 arms. In the Sanskrit sect, the power of Brahma represented life and creation. It was the yang side of things. However, Ranaga's blood-colored Brahma form was extremely evil. There was even a trace of death chi lingering around it. The conversion of yin and yang could lead to life from death. Naturally, it could also turn life into death. Wherever the blood-colored Brahma avatar passed, all vitality was devoured, extinguished and withered. Chu Xiu used the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth once again. However, this time, it wasn't just a simple lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. He formed a Buddhist seal with his hands and covered himself with a layer of golden Buddhist light. The huge Dharma form sat cross-legged in midair, its hands forming a Buddhist seal. Although it looked like Chu Xiu himself, it gave off a solemn and dignified feeling. The lawful embodiment of heaven and earth's third eye opened on top of its head. What it released was also a majestic Buddhist light. When they saw this scene, everyone subconsciously looked towards the heavenly net treasure. Now, they suddenly felt that Chu Xiu might have some sort of relationship with the heaven treasure instant. The cultivation of this Buddhist technique had already far surpassed most of the heads of the halls in the heaven net treasure temple. As the huge and majestic Buddhist image appeared, Chu Xiu looked like a Buddha descending upon the world. His huge hand pressed downwards, the cross-shaped lotus flower in his palm bloomed. The blood-colored Brahma form roared and boundless blood-colored deathly aura collided with the palm. The deathly aura and the Buddhist light interweaved. They seemed to be equally matched. Just as Ranaga was about to explode with all his power, intending to make a desperate attack. Even if he couldn't kill Chu Xiu, he would at least seriously injure him. He suddenly discovered that countless cross-shaped lotus flowers were floating around him. In an instant, the Buddhist light illuminated the entire world and completely engulfed Ranaga. The intense Buddhist light was incomparably dazzling. It only dissipated after a dozen breaths of time. At that moment, there was no longer any blood-colored Brahma form. In fact, even Ranaga's body could not be found. Under such an overbearing Buddhist light, even Ranaga's body was purified. The heart demon shouted in Chu Xiu's mind, "What a waste! That was the body of an 8th heaven martial immortal expert. You destroyed it just like that?" Chu Xiu heaved a sigh of relief. "Just shut up. You also know that this is an 8th heaven martial immortal. Facing an existence of that level, if I dare to let my guard down and allow him to find an opportunity, I might even be able to escape." Facing an opponent of this level, Chu Xiu had to be extremely careful and prudent. Last time, Ranaga had tricked the Origin God and Mu Baishuang into escaping. It was clear how cunning he was. Although he had been extremely heroic and had wanted to let Yama escape with his life, who knew if he was being serious this time? Thus, when Chu Xiu had attacked just now, he had unleashed his yang source power with all his might. In an instant he had conjured countless cross-shaped lotus seals. However, the result was that he had used too much force, causing Ranaga to be reduced to nothing. Chapter 1448. The 8th layer martial immortal, the Lord of the Brahma Temple, Ranaga, had been killed. There was no longer any possibility of reversing the destruction of the Brahma sect. As the crowd marveled at Chu Xiu's strength, they were also astonished. It seemed that the destruction of the Brahma sect was even simpler than they had imagined. The Brahma sect that had divided the western regions with the heavenly Luo treasure temple, was destroyed just like that? Of course, it couldn't be said that the Brahma sect had already been destroyed. In fact, it was close to being destroyed. When Ranaja went to fight Chu Xiu to the death, Yanma had already led his men to flee. Blood and chi burst out from Yanma's body. He unleashed the dance of annihilation. The powerful power of annihilation immediately tore a hole in the Kunlun Devil cult's sacred flame formation. Although the Kunlun Devil cult's sacred flame formation could contain the power of the rootless sacred flame, it still had a flaw. It could not be replenished. The sacred flame formation could only absorb the rootless sacred flame once. Thus, it could not be replenished after being damaged. It could only watch as the people from the Brahma sect fled through the hole. When the supreme heavenly demon saw this, he immediately rushed forward to stop Yanma. He could pretend that he didn't know about formations and didn't use his full strength. However, if he dared to go easy on Yanma now, he would be too brazen. The Supreme Heavenly Demon knew a bit about Chu Xiu's character. He dared to say that if he were to go easy on Yanma and let him escape, Chu Xiu would definitely not let him off. Scram! Yanma roared. The huge arrow formed by the flames of annihilation tore through the void and shot toward the Supreme Heavenly Demon. The Supreme Heavenly Demon sneered. Boundless demonic mist turned into dark clouds that blocked his path. No matter how much power entered the dark clouds, they were all devoured. Although the power of the dark clouds forced the Supreme Heavenly Demon to retreat, Yanma's footsteps were completely blocked by the Supreme Heavenly Demon. At that moment, Chu Xiu recovered a bit of his power and rushed over. Although he had expended a lot of energy to kill Renaga, Yanma seemed to have expended even more energy than he had before. Flee. Flee back to the Dalu Ocean. Wait for the sect master to return. Seeing that Chu Xiu was chasing after him, Yanma finally gave up on escaping. Moreover, running away was never his style. The image of Shiva with 2 faces and 4 arms appeared once again. This time, Yama had thousands of incarnations, and each incarnation contained a trace of his soul. However, when these split souls were connected to each of the Dharma idols, they all seemed to be Yama at the same time. It was as if they were one entity, but at the same time they were not. Tens of thousands of Yama devils glared at Chu Xiu, their eyes filled with intense hatred and killing intent. As long as the sect leader is alive, the Sanskrit religion will continue to exist. Today I will risk my life to collect some interest. When the sect master returns, your entire devil Tao will be buried with my Sanskrit sect. Among the tens of thousands of Dharma idols, each one was brewing an extremely terrifying power. Chu Xiu's expression changed slightly as he shouted, "Attack! Stop him!" Supreme Heavenly Demon was closer, and his senses were sharper than Chu Xiu's. Therefore, before Chu Xiu could open his mouth, he moved and used his powerful devil chi to tear a part of the void and escape into it. Chu Xiu cursed in his heart. This guy was indeed unreliable. Even though Chu Xiu had already done something to his body, the Supreme Heavenly Demon still managed to escape at the critical moment. Chu Xiu shouted to Wei Shuya, "Elder Wei, Yanma is desperate. Everyone retreat and defend." The disciples of the Kunlun devil cult were the elites among the elites. Chu Xiu could not afford to lose them. Actually, before Chu Xiu said anything, Wei Shuya had already felt that something was wrong. Therefore, he immediately ordered the disciples to withdraw their defense and stop chasing. However, there were too many people from the Kunlun devil cult. With so many people, it was impossible for all of them to retreat at once. At this time, Yanma had already begun to erupt. Among the tens of thousands of Dharma idols, a world-destroying fire was ignited. There were even specks of golden primordial spirit fire mixed in. These Dharma forms exhausted all their power and burned fiercely. As the power burned fiercely, an empty space was formed in the sky. Any existence in the face of that destructive power would be completely devoured. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu formed a seal with both hands, and even the power of blood and qi erupted from his body. In an instant he pushed his power to the maximum. Worldly millstone, furnace of creation. Almost in an instant Chu Xiu had already used these 2 remarkable powers. Although the worldly millstone and the furnace of creation were remarkable powers that Chu Xiu had comprehended from the source of yin and yang at the same time, they were still 2 remarkable powers after all. Now that he had unleashed all of them at practically the same time, the backlash was extraordinarily great. In fact, it even caused slight cracks to appear on Chu Xiu's body. However, they were all hidden within his clothes, so they were not obvious. Seeing this, Wei Shuya said in a low voice, "Let's attack together. We can't let the sect master block that power alone." As he said that, all the demonic energy around Wei Shuya condensed in front of him and turned into a boundless demonic palm that surged toward that power. Shang Tianliang took a step forward, and the power of withering and glory around him began to forcibly push the power of time and space, wanting to completely block that power. Lu Jianghe also condensed all of his remaining qi and blood and abruptly released it. Qinqing Di, Lu Fengxian, and the others all looked at their fists. They were all martial artists who had taken the standard path of tempering their bodies. Although they had cultivated their physical strength to the extreme, they were proficient in close combat and not in blocking this kind of extremely large-scale power. Fang Baidu, who was standing at the side, said, "I'll set up the array. All you have to do is to stand behind me and give me all your power." As he said that, Fang Baidu actually took out dozens of array discs. In the span of 2 breaths, he combined these dozens of array discs to form a large array. When Lu Fengxian and the others had all channeled their power to Fang Baidu, and when Fang Baidu channeled it into the array discs, the dazzling moonlight had already soared into the sky, resisting the erosion of that power. At this moment, the entire sky, including the ground, could no longer be seen. Everything had been completely swallowed up by that power. All kinds of wild power erupted in the surrounding several miles, as if the great calamity that had happened 10,000 years ago had descended. This sort of powerful collision lasted for a very short period of time, not even 7 or 8 minutes. When the 7 or 8 minutes were over, the world-extinguishing flames finally stopped. Yama's corpse fell to the ground with a loud bang. His body was incomparably shriveled, even more shriveled than before. He looked like a dried corpse. After stopping the power, Chu Xiu stood where he was without moving. However, his complexion was as pale as a sheet of paper. The others, like Lu Jianghe and the others, were also in a sorry state. The might of an eighth heaven martial immortal burning his own life force and attacking with all his might was not to be underestimated. Most importantly, they not only had to bear the brunt of the power, but they also had to block all of the power. They could not allow even the slightest bit of it to escape. Although the power could not harm martial immortals, those below the profound understanding realm would not be able to withstand it. Anyone who came into contact with it would die. As the power dissipated, the entire place fell silent. Renaga was dead. Yama was also dead. Although some of the remaining disciples had escaped, that was no longer important. The Brahmin church could be said to have been annihilated. On the side of the heavenly treasure Rakshasa, Su Yun moved to Zen Master Jishan's side and said in a deep voice, "Chief, this is the best time to attack Chu Xiu. From the looks of it, Chu Xiu should have exhausted his strength. His subordinates should be exhausted as well. If we attack now, we will be able to capture Chu Xiu in one fell swoop." Zen Master Jishan glanced at Su Yun and frowned. He shook his head and said, "That's not feasible. You said it yourself. Chu Xiu should have exhausted his strength, but it is not certain that he has exhausted his strength. If we attack now and fail to kill Chu Xiu once we let him go, there will be endless troubles in the future, right? Moreover, even if Chu Xiu exhausted his strength, the power of the formation plate in his hand should not be exhausted, right? We also have to be on guard against him releasing the Deluocean." Zen Master Jishan firmly rejected Su Yun's suggestion. Currently, the heavenly treasure Rakshasa and Chu Xiu only had a falling out because of the matter of the Buddhist sect in the lower bound. It was not to the extent that they would fight to the death. Therefore, at this time, Zen Master Jishan was not willing to fight to the death with Chu Xiu for the sake of Su Yun. Of course, if Chu Xiu really didn't have the slightest ability to retaliate, he wouldn't mind getting rid of Chu Xiu and establishing a strong image for his sect's disciples. But the problem was that he really did not have the confidence. The haze in Su Yun's eyes became thicker. Even if he chose to cooperate with the Tan sect's evil thoughts to increase his cultivation and become the chief of the heavenly treasure Rakshasa and one of the higher-ups, he still had no way to influence the final decision of the heavenly treasure Rakshasa. But the problem was that Chu Xiu's strength was getting stronger and stronger. Now he could already kill a powerhouse of the 8th heaven. If he reached the 9th heaven, who could be his match? That would be another Dugu Weiwei. Elder Wei, bring some people to clean up the mess. Don't bother about those who have already escaped. Search the entire Sanskrit sect and find the whereabouts of the origin. At the same time, bring a team to the Deluocean. If the origin isn't here, it must be in the Deluocean. The Sanskrit sect had already been destroyed. Other than the sect leader of the Sanskrit sect who was outside, the others were not a concern. The origin was the most important. At this time, Zheng Tai finally got rid of Mu Baishuang and rushed over. Although Mu Baishuang could burst out with power comparable to the 8th heaven with the broken sword of the sword unique domain, he was still defeated by Zheng Tai in the end because he relied on external objects. By the time Zheng Tai hurried over, what he saw was a battlefield that was still exuding a Gangchi storm in ruins. All the surrounding martial artists who were watching the battle had complicated expressions on their faces. They were silent, and the disciples of the Kunlun devil cult were already there blatantly cleaning up the battlefield. Zheng Tai was dumbfounded. The battle is already over? Chu Xiu looked at Zheng Tai and revealed a smile that was not a smile. You came late and missed the most exciting part. Chapter 1449. Zheng Tai had come late but at the right time. So, he only let out a long sigh and didn't say anything. The Sanskrit sect had already been destroyed. What was the point of saying so much? However, he couldn't understand why the Sanskrit sect, which had 2 level 8 martial immortals, would collapse so quickly even though Mu Baishuang had delayed him for so long. The crowd dispersed. No one planned to add insult to injury, and no one dared to do so at a time like this. So, there was nothing left to see. The subordinates of the Kunlun devil cult had searched through the entire Sanskrit sect, but they couldn't find the yang source energy that belonged to the Sanskrit sect in the lower realm. In the end, they found it in the Daluotian continent. Although the Sanskrit sect had moved most of their forces to the lower realm, some of their trump cards were still in the Daluotian continent. Naturally, the yang source energy was also in the Daluotian continent. The destruction of the Sanskrit sect was actually a result of many coincidences. Ranaja had been too eager to use his trump card, so he had given the demon a huge opportunity. After all, the demon was only a half-step martial immortal. Even though he was a spy, he only had one chance to make a move. Originally, Chushio had planned to have Ranaja act like he was putting his life on the line to attack him, then launch a sneak attack on one of them. He didn't expect Ranaja to directly use his trump card, which was equivalent to using a bomb. Also, if the Sanskrit sect had chosen to flee back to the Daluo Brahmin sect the moment they found out that Chushio had made a move, they would definitely be able to exhaust Chushio to the point of retreating on his own accord with the formation and foundation of the Daluo Brahmin sect's headquarters that had been around for 10,000 years. Unfortunately, that was impossible. The Sanskrit sect's status and dignity wouldn't allow them to abandon their foundation in the lower realm and flee back to the Sanskrit sect like stray dogs. Furthermore, before the actual battle began, no one would believe that Chushio would really be able to kill two martial immortals of the eighth heaven and destroy the Sanskrit church in such a short period of time. Meanwhile, in the Daluotian continent, the Sanskrit sect's headquarters. The Yang Pole origin was already in the hands of Chushio. The Sanskrit sect did not have a thorough understanding of this thing, so they temporarily sealed it in a formation. Rubbing his chin, Chushio directly punched out, smashing the formation and holding the Yang ability source in his hand. The extreme Yang source smoothly integrated into Chushio's body, fusing with the devil path source that he had obtained in the primitive devil cave, turning into the yin and yang source that was rotating in Chushio's body. In an instant, the powerful yin-yang light pillar pierced through the entire Sanskrit hall. Chushio let out a muffled groan, and his third eye opened between his eyebrows. While suppressing the yin-yang force in his body, he also channeled out the power that he could not refine. The powerful energy ripples lasted for several hours before finally subsiding. Within Chushio's dantian, the two clumps of yin and yang energy circulated in a cycle. The two clumps were even attracting each other. Once they were activated by Chushio, the amount of yin and yang energy he could unleash would be several times or even more than 10 times greater than before. Moreover, Chushio didn't have to worry about the backlash of the power, because the yin-yang force fusion brought to Chushio was almost beyond his imagination. This time, not only did Chushio step into the 8th heavenly layer, but he also soared all the way to the peak of the 8th heavenly layer. Only by fusing the yin-yang force fusion could one possess such strength. Unfortunately, this method had already been used by Chushio. The other sources were with the life spirit. If he wanted to fuse the yin-yang force fusion again, he would have to kill the life spirit. Speaking of the life spirit, Chushio rubbed his head, feeling a headache coming on. Chushio's current strength was enough for him to look down on both the upper and lower realms. Chushio could even arrogantly say that with his current strength and foundation, as long as he was given some time to familiarize himself with his strength, he would even dare to challenge the supreme experts of the 9 heavens. However, this was still not enough compared to the life spirit, which was an existence that stood above the 9th heavenly layer. Even if Chushio stepped into the 9th heavenly layer, he would probably only be about the same as Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. However, 500 years had passed. How much had the life spirit grown in Netherworld heaven? Chushio didn't need to think about these things anymore. The life spirit had already begun to intervene in the lower realms, so he could only improve his strength as soon as possible. Even if Netherworld heaven descended now, Chushio wouldn't be surprised at all. In the South Sea of the lower realms, above the vast sea, there were violent winds and thunderstorms and tsunamis. Compared with the East Sea, the environment in the South Sea was extremely harsh and unsuitable for human survival. Even warriors wouldn't set up sects here because the essence chi in this place was extremely chaotic. However, at this time, on a small deserted island in the depths of the South Sea, the Taoist Master, the World Master, the Master of Fan Sect, and Meng Xing had gathered here. Since they came to the lower realms, they had disappeared. After such a long time, they had actually come to the depths of the South Sea. The Master of Fan Sect frowned and said, "Is this really where longevity heaven is located? Are you sure you're right?" The Taoist master shook his head and said, "To be honest, I'm not sure, but according to the ancient books and my inference, it should be here." 10,000 years ago, the patriarch of the Three Pristines Palace had already deduced the clues about longevity heaven. Unfortunately, at that time the Great Tribulation appeared and time waits for no one. Today we can come to the lower realms again and its fate. Whether it's true or not, how can we know the result if we don't try? As he spoke, the Taoist master took out 4 objects that looked like metal and stone, on which were densely drawn runes, and threw them to the others. This is the boundary-breaking stone. If you pour all your power into it, it can isolate a side of the world and it can also break a side of the world. This thing is the foundation of the great protective array of the Three Pristines Palace. After it's used, the 3 of you must return it. The others nodded. They didn't understand arrays, so it was useless for them. Moreover, no one dared to not return the Taoist master's things. The 4 stood around and poured their power into the boundary-breaking stone. In an instant, the world around them had been divided, as if a square mark had been cut in the space. As the world was cut, a deep and serene aura bloomed from it. It was incomparably cold and full of the death chi. Under the bamboo hat of the world master, 2 spots of Buddhist light bloomed in his eyes and seeped into the death chi. Something is wrong. In my perception, this aura is full of deathly stillness, without the slightest bit of vitality. Instead, it seems to be formed by the condensation of all the evil forces in this world. How can a world that can emit such an aura be the legendary everlasting heaven that is immortal and undefeatable? The master of Brahma sect sneered and said, "Bald donkey, ignorant. Primal yin and yang, life toward death, the cycle of life and death. Who said that the everlasting heaven can't have the death chi?" In fact, the master of Brahma sect also felt that something was wrong, but he habitually wanted to refute the world master. Whatever the world master said, even if it was right, was wrong in his eyes, so he had to refute it. The world master said coldly, "If you dare to call me bald donkey again, don't blame me for disregarding the bigger picture and killing you, you heretic." The 2 of them were habitually fighting each other, but the world-breaking stone's power completely pierced through the 2 worlds. There was a loud bang and an endless amount of dark death chi roared out. It was accompanied by the wailing of ghosts and the howling of gods. It echoed through the world. At the same time, there was a strong fluctuation of power. The world master's expression suddenly changed and he shouted, "Retreat! This is not the everlasting heaven." As soon as the world master said this, 4 figures rushed out from the passage opened by the boundary-breaking stone. One of them was a strong and majestic figure wearing battle armor. He held a blood-red spear in his hand and smashed it at the world master. The power seemed to be able to split the mountains and rivers. The world master chanted the name of Buddha, and his indestructible golden body was already displayed. He put his palms together and directly grabbed the blood-red spear. However, at this time, the world master's eyebrows slightly twitched. Most of the time, the world master's face was hidden under the bamboo hat, so few people could see his expression. At this time, the world master's expression changed greatly. The opponent's power was simply beyond his imagination. The blood-red spear flicked and smashed, and the world master's whole body was directly sent flying. Another charming and enchanting woman appeared in front of the sect master of Brahma sect. She held a demon sword in her hand, and when the long sword slashed down, the sky was filled with red lotus karmic fire. The sect master of Brahma sect snorted coldly, and the boundless world-extinguishing fire rose from his feet, confronting the red lotus karmic fire. However, the next moment, a red lotus bloomed in his heart. In an instant, the good and evil sides of the sect master of Brahma sect had completely fallen into madness, and he even started cursing at himself. Sensing that something was wrong, the sect master of Brahma sect forcefully suppressed his state of mind, and his figure frantically retreated. On the other side, Meng Xinghe encountered a skinny old man in a black robe. The old man waved his hands repeatedly, and the laws of heaven and earth weaved into a formation that surrounded Meng Xinghe. Meng Xinghe frowned. This was somewhat similar to his subordinate Fang Daoqin's method. Just as he wanted to use the Starlight Dao sword in his hand to completely tear the formation apart, he was shocked to find that he could no longer mobilize the power of the laws. Using the laws to weave a formation, and then using the formation to restrict the laws, using heaven and earth as a formation. This kind of formation Dao cultivation was simply godlike. Boundless starlight shrouded Meng Xinghe, and he immediately exploded with his strongest strength to jump out of the formation. On the other hand, the Dao sovereign encountered a madman, a battle maniac. He could use more than a dozen kinds of demonic arts in a breath's time, and he only attacked without defending. It was as if every move was aimed at mutual destruction. Even though the Tao sovereign seemed calm, he had no choice but to retreat. After forcing the Tao sovereign and the other three to retreat, the four did not pursue them. Instead, they stood guard at the entrance of the passage, and the old man laid down a formation that madly absorbed the violent chi of heaven and earth in the South Sea. At the same time, an eerie sword chi erupted from within, and the power caused the Tao sovereign and the others to suddenly change their expressions, and they immediately retreated even further. The sect master of Brahma sect's expression was uncertain. Who are they? The Tao sovereign shook his head and sighed. I don't know, but I do know that we've created a big problem this time. Chapter 1450. Lord Dao Xin and the others looked at each other. Even though they were supreme experts of the ninth heaven who stood at the peak of the Daluo heaven, they had never encountered such a thing. Opening up a space only to see a bunch of experts appear on the other side. It seemed like they had released something that they shouldn't have. What are they doing? The sect leader asked. Meng Xinghe said in a low voice, from the looks of it they are stabilizing and expanding this space. They may be releasing more people. The four of them fell silent. Things seemed to be getting out of hand. This was not the longevity heaven, but an unknown and dangerous world. Lord Dao Xinghe sighed. This is our karma. Since we have opened it, we must find a way to seal it. Let's go back and gather the forces of the Dalu Ocean and the lower worlds to find a way to seal it again. The four people present all nodded their heads and no one criticized anything. Although this place was found by Lord Dao Xinghe, they had agreed to open it. Now that something had happened, how could they blame Lord Dao Xinghe? Now was not the time to blame each other and kill each other. The experts of the nine heavens all understood these principles. Even the sect leader and the world lord, the two old enemies, did not quarrel. After returning from the South Sea, they parted ways on the coast and headed back to their respective sections. The sect leader was thinking about how the sect had developed during this time. Even if it was not as strong as the Tianluo Bao sect and the instant donkeys, it should not be too weak. When the sect leader arrived at the sect's encampment, he looked at the ruins and the scorched earth that had just gone through a great battle. The good and evil sides of the sect leader began to twitch and twist. What happened? What is going on? All the experts of the ninth heavens were gathered in the South Sea. The sect leader had 2 eighth heavens experts and a lot of resources. But now why was the sect leader turned into a scorched earth? Who did this? Was it the Tianluo Bao sect? At this time, a few people suddenly appeared from the ruins of the Brahma sect. They looked at the Brahma sect's sect leader and looked like they were about to cry. Sect leader, you're finally back. They were all survivors of the previous battle against the Brahmin sect. Yama had fought with his life on the line to buy them time to escape. After these people escaped, they were smart enough not to run around. Instead, they chose to hide within the ruins of the Sanskrit sect after the Kunlun demon sect had left. Even if the Kunlun devil cult wanted to kill him, they probably wouldn't search this place again. The Brahmin sect master appeared in front of them in a flash and asked angrily, "What's going on? How did the Sanskrit sect become like this?" When the disciples told him everything that had happened, the two sides of good and evil on the face of the Brahma sect's sect leader had already disappeared, replaced by endless killing intent. Chuxiao. With a furious roar, the void was torn apart. Endless wind, rain and thunder surged in the sky, as if it was the end of the world. At the same time, when the Taoist master, the world master and Meng Xinghe returned to their respective sects, they all knew what had happened during this period of time. No one had expected that when the strongest of the nine heavens were not around, Chuxiao would cause such a ruckus. He almost poked a hole in the sky of the Jianghu of the upper and lower realms with his own strength. They all knew the character of the Brahma sect master. Most of the time, he was in a state of half-madness, not to mention at this time, he would definitely find trouble with Chuxiao at the first instance. So after they heard the news, they also went to the Kunlun devil cult. At this time, most of the forces of the Kunlun devil cult had withdrawn from the South China branch to the west pole of Kunlun Mountain. Right now, the Kunlun demon sect was already a sect that stood at the pinnacle of the Daluo heavens and the lower realm. There was no need for them to nervously guard the entrance of the spatial tunnel in the southern barbarian land like before. Moreover, some formation materials and other treasures obtained from the Brahma sect could allow Master Yuanji and Chao Shen to upgrade the formation of the entire Kunlun devil cult. At the same time, they could draw the power of the rootless sacred fire more smoothly, so that the Kunlun devil cult would condense in the original place more intensely. So in this way, everyone also migrated back to the Kunlun devil cult to cultivate. At this time, Chu Xiu was in seclusion in the Kunlun devil cult to familiarize himself with his current realm of the eighth heaven, but at this time the door of the Kunlun devil cult was forcibly knocked open. Wei Shuya stood at the door with a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, "Something big has happened. There is news from the sixth demon sect. The four Daluotian supreme experts of the ninth heaven have returned." The sixth demon sect was in the South China Sea. When the four Daluotian returned from the South China Sea to the Central Plains, they would definitely pass by the sixth demon sect. On Chu Xiu's side, he had already sent people to inform the sixth demon sect to monitor the movements in the South China Sea. Chu Xiu frowned slightly. This group of people came back fast enough. I guess they returned without any results. From the beginning, Chu Xiu did not think that they could find the longevity heaven. If it was so easy to find the longevity heaven, why would Dugu Weiwei take so long to find it? Elder Wei, go and open the formation. Let all the disciples hide in the center of the rootless sacred fire formation. When the supreme experts of the ninth heaven come, ordinary martial immortals will not be able to stop them. Wei Shuya and the others acted as if they were facing a great enemy. However, Chu Xiu did not panic. He had already reached the peak of the eighth heaven. The two pairs of yin and yang source energies had given Chu Xiu a powerful foundation of power. This gave him a bit of confidence when facing the supreme experts of the ninth heaven. Moreover, the Sanskrit sect had already been destroyed. There was no point in panicking. They could only deal with the situation as it came. Just as Wei Shuya's side was starting to make the necessary arrangements, a powerful dark cloud came flying towards the Kunlun demon sect. Wherever it passed, it could be seen clearly even if it was over 10 miles away. That dark cloud was the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect, who was extremely furious. After knowing that it was Chu Xiu who destroyed the Sanskrit sect, the hierarch did not even wait for a moment. He went straight to the Kunlun devil cult. At that moment, his eyes were filled with killing intent. The good and evil expression on his face was now twisted and hideous. He only had one thought in his mind, and that was to kill Chu Xiu and bury the entire Sanskrit sect with him. With a loud bang, the pitch-black arrow of annihilation streaked across the sky. Wherever it passed, all power would be melted away and the laws would be completely shattered. On the peak of the Kunlun mountain, a cross-shaped lotus bloomed. Resplendent Buddhist light shone brightly and blocked the arrow of annihilation. When the power of annihilation collided with the Buddhist light, a loud explosion erupted. The entire Kunlun mountain trembled and started a large-scale avalanche. Chu Xiu stood on the peak of the Kunlun mountain and said calmly, "You've just returned and you're already so angry. It seems like the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect has failed to find the longevity heaven?" Chu Xiu. The hierarch of the Sanskrit sect shouted, "Very well, you've done very well. 10,000 years ago, the Tianluo treasure temple wanted to destroy the Sanskrit sect, but it failed. Now you've done it. As long as I don't die, the Sanskrit sect will still stand tall in both the upper and lower realms after a few decades. But because of you, the entire Devil Dao will no longer exist. I'll slaughter the entire Devil Dao and bury them with my Sanskrit sect." Chu Xiu shrugged and said, "That's unreasonable. I'm the one who destroyed the Sanskrit sect. What does it have to do with the entire Devil Dao? The Sky Devil Palace has never had any enmity with the Sanskrit sect. Who did they offend when they were destroyed? As long as there's the word devil in their name, I won't let them continue to exist." At that moment, 3 streams of light streaked across the sky. They were the World Lord, the Tao Lord, and Meng Xinghe. The hierarch of the Sanskrit sect looked at the 3 of them and said coldly, "Are the 3 of you here to stop me too?" Meng Xinghe said lightly, "I also have enmity with Chu Xiu. But if the hierarch wants to make a move, I'll give this opportunity to you. After all, your enmity is greater." The World Lord chanted the name of Buddha and didn't say anything else. As an old rival, he was naturally happy to know that the Sanskrit sect was destroyed. At the same time, he felt a sense of loss. Therefore, he didn't want to add insult to injury. Whatever the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect wanted to do, he wouldn't stop him. The Tao Lord shook his head lightly and said, "I'm not stopping you because I want to protect Chu Xiu. What if Chu Xiu releases the Daluotian? What will you do then? Don't forget what we're facing now. We've opened that passage and released those existences. We haven't even dealt with them yet. Do you want to release another trouble?" Chu Xiu frowned. What did the Tao Lord mean? What did they release when they opened the passage that the Tao Lord said was trouble? The hierarch of the Sanskrit sect said coldly, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Don't forget the thing you gave me before. As the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect said, he directly activated the break boundary stone in his hand. In an instant, the entire area of the Kunlun devil cult's mountain peak was completely separated. At the same time, it wrapped Chu Xiu and the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect. Seeing this, the Tao Lord immediately shouted, "Are you crazy? The break boundary stone needs to be used to reseal the passage. How dare you use it to kill Chu Xiu?" The break boundary stone belonged to the Tao Lord. They were supposed to return it after using it. However, an accident happened on the way, which caused the Tao Lord to forget to return the break boundary stone. The break boundary stone could break boundaries, so it could naturally separate a world. As long as it was activated in the opposite direction, it could isolate an area of space. However, this thing was a consumable. It had been used once before. Now that the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect used it again, it was very likely that the break boundary stone in his hand would break. The hierarch of the Sanskrit sect said coldly, "Since the 3 pristine temple can refine 4 break boundary stones, it shouldn't be a problem to refine another one. After I kill Chu Xiu, I will naturally use all my strength to find the materials for you to refine another break boundary stone." After saying this, the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect looked at Chu Xiu with a murderous look in his eyes. "Now what else do you have?" Chu Xiu shook his head. "No, this is the only trump card." Before the hierarch of the Sanskrit sect could continue speaking, Chu Xiu suddenly showed a trace of a mysterious smile. "The trump card is still the same, but it has been so long. Can't I change the way I use it?" "Why do you think I talked nonsense with you for so long? You must have arrived by now." As soon as this was said, everyone's expression suddenly changed. Chapter 1451. Chu Xiu had never underestimated these supreme masters of the ninth heaven. Although Chu Xiu did succeed in threatening them with the array board last time, that was based on the fact that the only one who really wanted to kill him was the sect master of Fan sect. At that time, the Tao Master had to go to Longevity Heaven and did not want to cause trouble for the sake of the overall situation. Now that the Tao Master and the others had returned, Chu Xiu did not dare to gamble on their attitude. At this critical moment of life and death, how could he base his own life and death on the attitude of others? So long before the Tao Master and the others returned, Chu Xiu had already reconstructed the body of the heart demon and thrown it to the Daluotian High Heaven sect. The array board still had a weakness and there were too many ways to break it. But the connection between the heart demon and Chu Xiu was at the level of the spirit, so it was more hidden and difficult to block. In fact, the moment he discovered the sect master of Fan sect, Chu Xiu had already informed the heart demon to activate the array of High Heaven sect. Going back to a quarter of an hour ago, the heart demon was leisurely reading a Tao scripture in front of the spiritual cloud realm. At this time, his body was reconstructed by Chu Xiu with the blood of a martial immortal. This time he did not have to be a spy, so the heart demon reconstructed his face with a new appearance. This face was not easy to describe because the heart demon had created it based on the facial advantages of all the people in his memory, so it could be said to be handsome to the point of being unreal. In the words of Lu Jianghe, he did not know where he got the courage to make his appearance more handsome than Lu Fengxian, but the result was a little awkward and unreal. At this moment, the heart demon received a message from Chu Xiu in his mind. He immediately stood up and shouted, "Sect Master Qin." Qin Baiyuan was also in High Heaven sect at this time. Although the lower world also had a branch of High Heaven sect itself was now extremely weak and could no longer support the simultaneous development of two sects. Therefore, Qin Baiyuan made the Daluotian his main place of development. He only casually sent some disciples to guard the branch palaces in the lower realm. He was still quite nostalgic and wanted to rebuild High Heaven sect among the Daluotian people. Hearing the voice of the heart demon, Qin Baiyuan immediately rushed over and said with a complicated expression, "Are you really going to release that person?" Xanmo chuckled and said, "Sect Master Qin, you should know the status of Sect Master in Jianghu now. Any existence that stands at the peak must experience tribulation after tribulation in order to stand firm. Your High Heaven sect should have experienced this in the past. Now that High Heaven sect is completely on the side of the Kunlun Devil cult, Sect Master Qin, do you choose to climb to the peak with the Kunlun Devil cult, or do you choose to retreat and see if those people will settle accounts with you later? This question should be a good choice, right?" Qin Baiyuan let out a long sigh. Of course he knew what to choose. There was no turning back. "Open the spirit array." With that, Qin Baiyuan and the Heart Demon joined forces to completely activate the spirit array around the spiritual cloud realm. The spirit array in the spiritual cloud realm had long been set up by the rootless sacred fire that Chu Xiu had asked Grandmaster Yuanji and Chaoying. At this time, as the spirit array erupted, the boundless rootless sacred fire completely enveloped the spiritual cloud realm, tearing apart the spirit array. In the deepest part of the spiritual cloud realm, Tianhun sensed that the surrounding spirit array was collapsing. He raised his head and a faint smile appeared on his face. "Oh, are you ready to let me out? You're faster than I expected." Tianhuan's body suddenly struggled, and the chains and bronze pillars around him shattered one after another. Even the entire spiritual cloud realm was collapsing. Boundless devil chi swarmed into the spiritual cloud realm. As the entire spiritual cloud realm collapsed, a figure surrounded by a devil shadow stepped out of the broken space, causing the weather to change. The Heart Demon stared at the person in front of him, dumbfounded. The devil chi on the person in front of him was comparable to the extreme devil chi in the deepest part of the primitive devil cave. It was even comparable to the primitive devil cave. Qin Baiyuan was also shocked. Was this the person who had been sealed by all the power of the Daluocean? Was it right or wrong for him to let him out today? Tianhun was surrounded by pitch-black devil chi, and he looked at Qin Baiyuan and the Heart Demon with interest. "Are you his subordinates?" The Heart Demon nodded, bowed and said, "Your Excellency, the Sect Master is waiting for you in the mortal world." "Sect Master? Haha, many people used to call me Sect Master." Tianhun laughed, not knowing what was going on. "Don't worry, he won't die." As soon as he finished speaking, Tianhuan's figure moved, and he disappeared in an instant. When Tianhun completely disappeared, Qin Baiyuan heaved a sigh of relief. In the face of that powerful demonic pressure just now, he actually had a feeling that he did not even dare to breathe loudly. What is the relationship between that person and Cult Master Chu? The Heart Demon shrugged and said, "To be honest, I am not sure. Perhaps even Cult Master Chu is not sure." Qin Baiyuan was stunned. What was this? On Mount Kunlun in the mortal world, the expressions of Dao Master and the others changed slightly. Things had finally developed in the worst direction. Chu Xiu had actually released that person from 500 years ago. Could there be anything worse than this? However, the sect master of the Brahma religion's heart was filled with endless killing intent. So what if Chu Xiu released that person? That would be a headache for Dao Master and the others in the future. The only thing he wanted to do now was to kill Chu Xiu. "Before he comes, I will kill you first." As soon as the sect master of the Brahma religion's voice fell, he formed a seal with both hands. On his left and right, a black lotus burning with destructive flames and a dazzling white lotus emitting strong vitality appeared at the same time. They drew upon the power of yin and yang in the world and crushed toward Chu Xiu. The power of heaven and earth that a level 9 martial immortal could draw upon was extremely shocking. As soon as the black and white lotus appeared, the entire Kunlun devil cult's world was instantly covered, as if it was going to destroy the world. At that moment, Chu Xiu also formed a seal with his hands, and his third eye opened between his brows. He drew upon the power of yin and yang, and the worldly millstone appeared, crushing toward the black and white lotus. Both were attacks that combined the power of yin and yang. When the two collided, a powerful wave of primordial qi spread between heaven and earth, producing a deafening boom. Chu Xiu took several steps back, but the sect master of the Brahma religion did not move at all. Although Chu Xiu was currently a peak level 8 heavenly layer martial immortal, and possessed source energy, his foundation as a level 9 heavenly layer martial immortal was even stronger. If they were to fight, Chu Xiu would still be the one to suffer. When Dao Master and the others saw this scene, they suddenly raised their eyebrows. In Chu Xiu's opinion, he was at a disadvantage in this attack, but in the eyes of Dao Master and the others, Chu Xiu's attack was shockingly powerful. They had also reached the 9th heaven from the 8th heaven, so they naturally knew how big the gap between the two heavens was. However, the power that Chu Xiu displayed was even stronger than when they were in the 8th heavenly layer. It was so strong that it was almost equivalent to when they had just stepped into the 9th heavenly layer. If they had fought with Chu Xiu at that time, it was uncertain who would win and who would lose. At that moment, everyone's expression was a little uncertain. They were not sure if they should attack or not this time. This was especially so for Meng Xinghe, who had a big grudge against Chu Xiu. Yu Weikong was his good friend and his only good friend, but he died in the hands of Chu Xiu. Meng Xinghe was determined to avenge this grudge. Originally, he thought that the sect master of the Brahma religion would be able to easily defeat Chu Xiu, but now it seemed that things were a little off. At that moment, a powerful pressure descended from the distance, and a turbulent demonic aura instantly shrouded the entire peak of Kunlun. The heavenly soul walked in the air, and every step he took seemed to step on the rhythm of the earth, causing the whole world to tremble. The faces of the Tao sovereigns and the others were extremely grave. Was this the one who had caused rivers of blood in the Great Law Heavens 500 years ago? Just this aura alone was enough to shock them in their hearts. On the side of the Kunlun devil cult, Lu Jiang, he was even more shocked and cried out involuntarily, "Sect Master?" Although the temperament of the sect master in front of him was somewhat different from the temperament of the sect master in his memory, he was sure that this was indeed the appearance of the former Dugu Weiwei. Everyone also looked at Lu Jianghe. This person was Dugu Weiwei? Wei Shuya frowned slightly. It was a good thing that Patriarch Dugu had returned, but did the Kunlun devil cult need two sect masters? Although Wei Shuya was one of the leaders of the Yinma clan in the past, in his era, Dugu Weiwei was already a legend and a symbol. The current Kunlun devil cult had little to do with the Kunlun devil cult 500 years ago, except for Lu Jianghe. It was completely destroyed by Chu Xiu. Therefore, in the current Kunlun devil cult, Wei Shuya dared to say that most people only recognized cult master Chu and not Patriarch Dugu. However, what would Patriarch Dugu think? At that moment, countless demonic aura formed a demonic dragon under Heavenly Soul's feet and formed a throne. The Supreme Heavenly Demon had also done such an extremely pretentious act, but one was acting pretentious, while the other was really pretentious. Looking at the people present with interest, Heavenly Soul said with a faint smile, "Tianluo Treasure Temple, Sanskrit sect, 3 Pristines Temple and 1 I don't know. Oh, most of them are descendants of old rivals. Your ancestors sealed me 500 years ago. Do you think I should get some interest from you first?" As soon as he said this, the expressions of Lord Dao and the others suddenly changed. Lord Dao said in a low voice, "Patriarch Dugu, let's not talk about who was right and who was wrong 500 years ago. However, a space passage has appeared in the South Sea, connecting to another world full of the netherworld death chi. The experts there are even comparable to the 9th heaven. Now that the Dalu Ocean and the lower world are completely connected, the two worlds are originally one. Once that world invades, the two worlds will not be able to survive. Today we should naturally join forces to fight against the enemy. Let's solve the troubles of the outside world first." Heavenly Soul nodded lightly. Just when Lord Dao and the others felt that this person was not as unreasonable as the legend said 500 years ago, Heavenly Soul said, "You're right, but why do you think that I need to join forces with you? Are you worthy?" Chapter 1452. Tianhun was not Dugu Weiwei, but at this time, Tianhun appeared in Dugu Weiwei's appearance and stood there with his powerful aura. Except for Chu Xiu, who would know that he was not Dugu Weiwei. Anyway, Lord Taishan and the others were shocked by his powerful aura and domineering tone. For a moment they did not know what to say. At this time Chu Xiu's heart skipped a beat. Had Netherworld Heaven already arrived? Had the Life Spirit already appeared? It was a little too early, much earlier than Chu Xiu had imagined. At this time Tianhun suddenly changed the topic and said lightly, "I don't want to settle what happened 500 years ago with you. Those guys are now buried in the ground. It is too degrading to settle accounts with their disciples and disciples. But there must be a result today. My successor is here. Since he has a grudge against the guy from the Brahma denomination, let them settle it themselves. If you want to intervene, I don't mind taking some interest from you." Tianhuan's words stunned Chu Xiu. There was no problem for Chu Xiu to pretend to be Dugu Weiwei's successor now. It was impossible for the whole city to know that Dugu Weiwei's 3 souls had been separated. But the problem was that the script was a little wrong. He had released Tianhun to let him kill. Why did he still have to face the supreme masters of the 9th heaven in the end? Chu Xiu directly asked Tianhun in his mind, "What's going on? Since you have already come out, why don't you directly kill them? Why do you still need me to do it?" Both of them were Dugu Weiwei's divided souls. Previously they had a certain primordial spirit sense. At this time they directly used primordial spirit voice transmission, so Lord Taishan and the others could not find out. Hearing this, Tianhun said helplessly, "Netherworld Heaven has already arrived. Do you think I don't want to show my power, kill the guy from the Brahma denomination, take in the others and then fight against Netherworld Heaven together? It's not that I don't want to, but I can't do it right now. Don't forget, I'm only 1/3 of Dugu Weiwei's soul, and I'm the kind of soul that was used as a scapegoat. So, when your soul was split, your power was used to cleanse your karma and past, and you were thrown into the time-space samsara. How much power could a scapegoat like me get? Therefore, our combined strength is inferior to a life soul. Besides, I was sealed in the Daluocean for 500 years. Do you think I was cultivating during those 500 years? In the seal, one's strength would only decrease, not increase. Although I have the memories of Dugu Weiwei from 500 years ago, I don't have the power of Dugu Weiwei from 500 years ago. Moreover, although the number of people in front of them was not as many as 500 years ago, their strength was much stronger than that of 500 years ago. If I don't get rid of the Brahmin cult kid in the first place, the others will realize my strength. Believe it or not, they will immediately attack me together. Therefore I can't do anything. You have to do it yourself. But with me here, even the strongest Tao master won't dare to attack you. After listening to Tianhun, Chu Xiu felt helpless. He had really neglected this point. In the past, when Dugu Weiwei fought against the Daluocean people, as long as his primordial spirit left his body, he would be able to forcefully take over the body and absorb qi and blood to recover to his peak strength. However, Tianhun was not Dugu Weiwei. Even if he had the memories of Dugu Weiwei from the past, he would need time to recover his strength. That was why he was so flashy when he appeared just now. It turned out that he was just bluffing. Hearing Tianhuan's words, the Tao master immediately said, "Senior, rest assured. This is a personal grudge between the Brahmin cult and cult master Chu. We will definitely not interfere." The world master also nodded. Revenge breeds revenge. When will it end? Today let them settle their karma. Meng Xinghe did not say anything, but he had already taken a step back to show his attitude. Although he also had a grudge against Chu Xiu, it was not enough for him to risk his life for it. In fact, the Xinghe loose cultivator had participated in the battle 500 years ago. However, the Xinghe loose cultivator of that generation was not strong. He was only at the 5th heaven. However, it was precisely because he wasn't strong that he didn't rush forward, which allowed him to survive that battle. Later on, the Xinghe loose cultivator of that generation wrote down the details of the battle and described Dugu Weiwei as incomparably terrifying. According to his ancestor's description, even if Meng Xinghe had reached the 9th heaven, he still did not dare to attack him. The others wanted to stay out of it, but the cult master of the Brahmin cult said in a low voice, "Senior, you really won't interfere in the battle between me and Chu Xiu? If you still want to intervene at the critical moment, then there's no need to fight this battle. Senior, you can directly intervene. I didn't participate in the battle 500 years ago. Today I also want to see how strong the strongest of the 9 heavens and above are. Even if I die, being able to witness this kind of power makes my life in this world not a waste." Tianhun waved his hand and calmly said, "Could it be that I will go back on my words? As my disciple and the cult master of this generation, Chu Xiu's inheritance is also the legacy of the Kunlun cult. In the past, when I was in the 9th heaven, no one could defeat me. Now that Chu Xiu is in the 8th heaven, no one in the 8th heaven can defeat him. When I was above the 9th heaven, I wanted to challenge him, but there was no one up there. But when Chu Xiu wants to challenge him, there is still you. I will not interfere in this battle. If he can't even defeat you, how can he be the cult master of the devil cult?" "That's good." The cult master of the Brahmin cult shouted, and 3 divine halos appeared around him. One of them was filled with eerie nirvana, another was filled with strong vitality, and the last one was filled with gray chaotic mist. The power of the Brahma sect's 3 gods combined, and the Brahma sect leader seemed to have been elevated to a higher level. His aura seemed to be independent of this world, and when he took a step forward, it was as if he had transcended time and space. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Chu Xiu and his fist came crashing down. At this time, if it were someone else, even if it was Meng Xinghe, he would not choose to fight with Chu Xiu. Instead, he would retreat for the time being. In their opinion, Dugu Weiwei was the cult master of the devil cult 500 years ago, and Chu Xiu was the current cult master of the devil cult, which was equivalent to Dugu Weiwei's reincarnation. But now, this reincarnation was killed by him. Even if Dugu Weiwei asked for a fair fight, would he dare to fight? Were they not afraid of revenge in the future? Therefore, no one would think of killing Chu Xiu at this time. But the cult master of the Brahmin cult would. He was basically half a lunatic. Normally, he would think about problems with a normal person's way of thinking. But now that the Brahmin cult had been destroyed, there was only one thought in his mind, and that was to kill Chu Xiu. Seeing the cult master of the Brahmin cult's fist coming down, Chu Xiu's eyes burst with a strong desire to fight. He could not count on Tianhun, so he could only stay here to deter Tao Master and the others from intervening. He had to rely on himself in this battle. The netherworld heaven life spirit had not completely descended, so if he died in the hands of the cult master of the Brahmin cult, wouldn't it be a joke? Although he had overestimated Tianhuan's strength, Chu Xiu did not underestimate his own strength. With the powerful foundation of two pairs of yin and yang origins, he was even confident of fighting against the strongest experts in the ninth heaven. The third eye on his forehead opened, and the power of yin and yang turned into a huge pillar of light, bursting out with a loud bang. With the power to break through the laws, it destroyed any power that appeared in front of it, and at the same time, blocked the cult master of the Brahmin cult's attack. The cult master of the Brahmin cult had the three powers of the Brahmin cult's three sacred halls, so he was equivalent to a small life and death lotus, but he did not have the magical power to completely isolate the world. But at this moment, as the three divine halos revolved, the three powers were constantly tearing at each other, and were unexpectedly able to suppress the power that Chu Xiu had unleashed with the yin and yang origins. Just as the cult master of the Brahmin cult was about to unleash the full power of the three gods, Chu Xiu's hand was already on the hilt of the formation-breaking saber. The saber was unsheathed, and a boundless sharp light hung in mid-air like the radiance of the moon. The saber fell, and the boundless sharp saber intent instantly enveloped the cult master of the Brahmin cult, making it impossible for him to dodge, nor did he have a chance to. The clouds parted and the moon shone brightly. Originally, Chu Xiu rarely used this divine ability, and even if he did use it, he would only use it when he was absolutely safe. But now Chu Xiu really could not wait any longer and he had to use it. The disparity in power between Chu Xiu and the cult master of the Brahmin cult simply could not afford to continue this battle of attrition. The longer the battle dragged on, the greater the disparity between the two of them would be. As such, he had to unleash all of his trump cards in one go. Otherwise he would not have another chance. Furthermore, with the heavenly soul by his side, even if he were to be severely injured after using the clear sky illuminating shadow, no one would dare to attack him while he was down. In the face of a powerful being from the ninth heavens, Chu Xiu had to severely injure him with his first saber strike. Even if he would also suffer a backlash, he had to bring his opponent's upper limit down to the same level as his. A formless sharpness completely enveloped the cult master of the Brahmin cult. The divine halos around his body did not shatter, but he felt as if his body was being sliced apart. The cult master of the Brahmin cult roared as he forced himself to make a hand seal. A holy golden lotus platform appeared beneath his feet, and a steady stream of life force flowed into his body. However, it was still useless. With Chu Xiu's current power, even a powerful being from the ninth heavens would not be able to completely nullify the clear sky illuminating shadow's power. Cracks had already begun to appear on the cult master's body, and this was something that his life force could not repair. At the same time, the powerful backlash was also tearing at Chu Xiu's body, causing cracks to appear all over his body, and blood began to gush forth uncontrollably. However, Chu Xiu forcefully endured the backlash and continued to unleash the power of the clear sky illuminating shadow to its fullest extent. In less than 10 breaths of time, the two of them were completely drenched in blood. Chapter 1453. The fact that Chu Xiu had used the clear sky illuminating shadow, which seemed like he was going to perish together with his opponent, stunned everyone present. The four supreme experts of the ninth heaven, including the Tao Master, had also fought with each other to test the waters. However, even the Brahma sect master and the world lord, who had always held grudges against each other, had never fought with such intensity. The number of supreme experts in each generation of the ninth heaven did not exceed 10, and there were only about 5 or 6 people who were at the peak at the same time. Their lives were very valuable and no one would be like Chu Xiu who would fight to the death. That would not be worth it. In fact, Chu Xiu also felt that it was not worth it, but he had no choice but to fight with his life. If he could not even deal with the Brahma sect master, how could he fight the life soul in netherworld heaven? He might as well clean himself up and let the life soul devour him. On the other hand, Tianhun looked at Chu Xiu without blinking. His gaze was extremely profound. He had told Chu Xiu to walk a different path from Dugu Weiwei, and he had actually succeeded. A part of the martial arts he was using now did indeed belong to Dugu Weiwei, including the clear sky illuminating shadow he was using. However, his martial path, including the martial skill that he had obtained from Dugu Weiwei, had already been used by him, and it felt like it belonged to him. At this moment, all the sharp energy in the world had dissipated and the full moon, which had been emitting boundless sharpness, had finally descended. Chu Xiu's entire body was covered in blood and his body was covered in tiny cracks. It was as if he would completely shatter if he moved even the slightest bit. However, the Brahma sect master who was opposite Chu Xiu had suffered even more serious injuries. Under the tearing of the clear sky illuminating shadow, his physical body had actually completely collapsed. Now he was completely relying on his own powerful strength to prevent his body from completely disintegrating. Throwing his head back and letting out a long roar, the hierarch of Fan sect bellowed, "Chu Xiu, do you really think that you can kill me with a single slash? The physical body is only skin, and only the primordial spirit is eternal. That slash of yours can cut through my physical body, but it can't cut through my primordial spirit." As the primordial spirit's golden radiance enveloped the Brahma sect master, his physical body completely collapsed into a bloody mist. However, the bloody mist did not dissipate. Instead, it began to condense as the primordial spirit's golden radiance enveloped it. As the golden radiance dissipated, a blood-colored Dharma form appeared in front of everyone. It had 3 faces and 8 arms, and 3 faces represented the Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. The 8 arms also held all kinds of weapons as well as Xiu. This blood-colored Dharma idol contained all the power of the Brahmin lineage, and it contained the power of life, destruction, and chaos. Its 8 arms spread out and smashed toward Chu Xiu. Although Chu Xiu's body was, it showed he was still. At this moment, the 2 eyes on Chu Xiu's forehead erupted with the power of yin and yang. The vertical eye on his forehead absorbed the power of yin and yang at the same time, and the 2 origin forces entwined together to envelop Chu Xiu's body, forcefully suppressing his physical body. This allowed his body, which was on the verge of collapse, to still erupt with power comparable to before. At the same time, Chu Xiu also had a pair of origin forces of yin and yang, and this time the power of yin and yang erupted from Chu Xiu's eyes at the same time. The left was yin and the right was yang. The 2 powers of yin and yang were like dragons, completely enveloping the 3 Dharma forms. An extremely pure power of yin-yang burst forth. At the same time, Chu Xiu also performed the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth. However, the lawful embodiment of heaven and earth that Chu Xiu used in his current state was a little strange. The left side of the huge Dharma form was as black as ink, and demonic chi filled the sky, while the right side shone with a dazzling golden Buddha light, yin and yang as one. As the 2 fists landed, the 2 powers of yin and yang burst out at the same time, reinforcing and restraining each other. In that instant, the power of the 2 powers was several times stronger than before, and it directly tore the arms of the 3 Dharma forms apart. But the 3 Dharma forms had 8 arms, and all kinds of mystic arts and seals landed on Chu Xiu's Dharma forms, causing Chu Xiu's Dharma forms to gradually collapse. But even so, Chu Xiu did not retreat. It was as if he was putting his life on the line, and even if his Dharma forms were to be destroyed, he wanted to take the sect leader of Fan sect down with him. The 2 Dharma forms clashed, and it was as if 2 huge beasts were tearing at each other. It looked like they were in a sorry state, but it was an intense fight. Dao Master and the others who were watching the fight frowned. The sect leader of Fan sect was wrong. He was wrong because he could not control his killing intent and anger, causing him to disregard everything. Even if Dugu Weiwei was around 500 years ago, he would still kill Chu Xiu. Even though Dugu Weiwei had expressed that he wouldn't interfere in this battle, he was still able to put an enormous amount of pressure on the Fan sect's sect leader by his side, causing him to involuntarily want to end the battle as soon as possible. But this was also what Chu Xiu wanted. Although they did not know how Chu Xiu managed to cultivate such terrifying power, he was only at the pinnacle of the 8th heaven, and his power was still a step away from the 9th heaven. Therefore, as long as the sect leader of Fan sect chose to fight steadily, the one who would be exhausted to death would be Chu Xiu. In the end, the patriarch of the Brahma sect didn't care about anything else. All he could do was unleash his greatest strength to fight Chu Xiu. It seemed like he was going to fight to the death with Chu Xiu, but in truth he was just wasting his greatest advantage. The 2 of them fought fiercely in mid-air, and in the end, the sect leader of Fan sect's 3 god forms and Chu Xiu's law phenomenon were so badly damaged that they broke apart. The sect leader of Fan sect used his own blood and chi to condense the 3 god forms, and when his 3 god forms broke apart, he was left with only his Yuan Shin body. But in the Vishnu temple there was a part of the primordial spirit-type secret arts, and even if the sect leader of Fan sect was left with only his Yuan Shin body, he could still fight. But at this time, all the blood and chi in Chu Xiu's body flowed into his 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet, and this was the moment he was waiting for. The sect leader of Fan sect thought that the corporeal body was useless, but in fact, for the experts of the 9th heavens, especially those who cultivated the primordial spirit secret arts, Even if their corporeal body was destroyed, there would be a day when they could be reborn with their Yuan-Shin body. Just like the supreme heavenly demon, he had even researched his Yuan-Shin to a state close to immortality. But a pure Yuan-Shin body also had a shortcoming, and that was that you were no longer a complete existence. Only when the corporeal body, Yuan-Shin spirit and body were united, would you be a complete living being, and if you only had a Yuan-Shin body, what was the difference between you and a wandering ghost? If the sect leader of Fan sect still had a corporeal body, it would be difficult for Chu Xiu to pull him into the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet. But now, the sect leader only had a Yuan-Shin left, and Chu Xiu had sacrificed all his blood and qi, so there was no way the sect leader of Fan sect could resist, and he was pulled into the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet. Looking at the misty Yuan-Shin space and the huge 6 paths of reincarnation wheel, the sect leader of Fan sect sneered, 6 paths of reincarnation? This belongs to the heavenly Luo Buddha, and it was something that the heavenly Luo Buddha didn't want in the past. Don't you find it laughable that you want to use it to kill me? With the strength of my Yuan-Shin, so what if I go through thousands of reincarnations? So what? The first one to run out of Yuan-Shin will be you, Chu Xiu. At this time, Chu Xiu's figure appeared in the Yuan-Shin space. He said indifferently, I know that the 6 paths of reincarnation power can't do anything to you, and I never intended to use it to exhaust you to death. Now that you don't have a body and I don't have a body, fighting in this space will only consume the power of our primordial spirits. Every battle of life and death will consume our minds. So today, let's see whose Yuan-Shin is stronger and who will last until the end. As soon as Chu Xiu's voice faded, the formation-breaking saber appeared in his hand, and he slashed it at the sect leader of Fan sect. The formation-breaking saber was in the outside world, but it was created by the power of his Yuan-Shin, just like Chu Xiu's arm. The only difference was that Chu Xiu was more comfortable with the saber. Similarly, there was no dazzling saber ray and it couldn't use the laws of heaven and earth, it was just a simple mountain-splitting saber. The sect leader of Fan sect snorted coldly, and he subconsciously formed hand seals to meet the saber, but other than the purest power of Yuan-Shin, nothing happened. Only then did he realize that this was no longer the outside world. Therefore, he immediately put his palms together in an attempt to clamp down on Chu Xiu's long saber. However, after a few moves, he was surrounded by danger and was beheaded by Chu Xiu's saber. As the head grew back, the face of the patriarch of the Brahma sect warped. In this pure primordial spirit space, everything was competing with the purest power of the primordial spirit. After dying once, the feeling was extremely real and it consumed Yuan-Shin and psyche. If this went on, the one who died the most would be the first to give up. The sect leader of Fan sect was like Chu Xiu, using the power of Yuan-Shin to form a spear and a sword to fight, but after fighting for God knows how many times, the sect leader of Fan sect was shocked to find that the final result was that Chu Xiu killed him the most, and he killed Chu Xiu the least. Originally, as a 9th level expert, the strength of his Yuan-Shin was definitely stronger than Chu Xiu, but after being killed several times by Chu Xiu, the gap was actually very small, and it was even about to be reversed. The sect leader of Fan sect already knew why this was. In this pure Yuan-Shin world, there was no way to use external forces, and they could only use their Yuan-Shin to fight with their physical bodies. But the problem was that the sect leader of Fan sect had never experienced this kind of most primitive fighting style. For a martial artist like Chu Xiu who grew up in the lower realms, he had trained his body to qi, and even before he cultivated qi, he had started to fight with the pure power of his physical body. Even though he had been away from this low-level martial artist for a long time, he could not forget all these memories. What about the sect leader of Fan sect? He was talented when he was young, and he was a core disciple of Fan Tian Temple since he was a child. He was carefully trained and he had no shortage of elixirs and other things. So when the sect leader of Fan sect officially started fighting in the pugilistic world for the first time, he was already a real pellet state existence. Sometimes too high a starting point was a kind of flaw. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.